Brian,
Hey Rick, how you doing?
good. I'm just trying to get things configured. I had originally set it up for dual monitors, and all I ended up with was a giant picture of my face over on one of my monitors, which isn't really what I was looking for.
No,
I
well,
have three screens currently.
okay, perfect. So what you're gonna do, and I just made you a host,
I saw
uh,
that.
so that way you got all the controls, and so that way you got the ability. And I would make Tim co-host because I don't know if I can still do that. Yep, I can't do that because I made you a host instead of a co-host, so I lost all my power. So when Tim comes in, you'll want to make him co-host. That way, if one of the two of you drop out, it doesn't end the meeting and everything stays
Yes.
going.
Okay.
Uh, so what I normally do is I will throw with my three screens, the one directly in front of me, I put my presenter view up and my chat, and then I have a screen with everyone's picture, and then I have a screen with the PowerPoint on my third screen. Now, for Garage Gurus, it's a little different because I share my presenter view, so I allow the whole screen to be used for that and share that screen. But
Okay.
if I'm doing a presentation for a third party, it works great because the only time I'm looking at the third screen is if I'm moving the mouse over to actually point something out on the PowerPoint. The
Right.
rest of the time, I've got all my notes, everything right in front of me where I'm looking at the camera, and then my peripheral is all the people, so I can see if someone's hand goes up. And the chat is right there next to my, because I use 32-inch screens, so that way the chat's right next to my presenter view. So that way, if something pops up on the chat, even while I'm doing that, I can see that, so I don't need someone else to man the chat because
Oh,
I
right.
normally do this all by my lone see, and like during the
Mm-hmm.
week I have around 40 students in the class, so I'm
Right.
managing a class of 40 all by myself. So with cameras on, and I got to see reactions there. I got to do this, so it's
Yeah. So, when you're doing that type of setup, where do you put their faces? Is it on the second monitor? So like I've got the screen in front of me with the camera mounted above it, right?
yeah, that's my main screen. I personally put everyone's faces to my right, and my
Okay.
camera is actually between, with, because my screen mount doesn't work good, is actually between my center and right screen, tucked against my right side. So that's why I'm a little bit, if I go to here, I'm not quite as centered,
Right.
but I kind of hit here, and that way I can hit the peripheral on both.
Right.
um, and it's really only noticeable when I go to my third screen. I have another camera, but the angle on it's too wide for my backdrop, and we're remodeling the office. I actually have a new desk, so I'm going to be spinning around. And I just got some oak closet doors and a new closet we put in my office, and so that's actually going to make the backdrop behind me is this oak nice finished oak wall, basically.
I gotcha.
And the closet, then I'll still have the screen if I want a virtual background. Uh, but then I can use the wider camera, which shows more of me and not just a talking head.
So on this one, I imagine they're going to want to see
All the notes.
that. Is that
Yep.
what you do? You see
Yep, sure
the
do.
presenter view?
I see your presenter view. Now I will now on your screen share, when you look at your screen share, you have two
Hmm.
choices. Actually, you got a lot of choices. But the first couple of choices are your three screens, right? So
Right.
if you click new share or whatever, you'll see the three screens. And then underneath that, you have a whole bunch of windows that are just different files you have open.
Right.
So if you click on the file, no matter what's on the screen, all they're going to see is that file. So if you put something else on the screen, they're still only going to see that file view. If you have the screen, then anything that you put on that screen, people will see.
Yeah. So there's a big green box outline around this window, which is
Yep.
telling me that that's all they see.
Yep. Exactly.
And you see like my mouse moving around on
Yep.
that screen?
Perfect.
All right. Yeah. So tell me if you've noticed this. If I'm over here on presenter view, clicking through slides, there's a delay of changing slides. But if I go click on the PowerPoint, which is on my third screen,
Huh.
or use my arrows, right,
Right.
it goes real fast. without a
I've not
delay.
noticed that on my computer user because I use Presenter View all the time and I've never
Right.
really noticed the delay. So maybe I'm just that slow.
Eh,
And I still haven't seen a link for our vision training, Tim.
It's the they sent it. Let me check.
I checked through my emails. I have where they're supposed to send me a link. I got the thing for the virtual vision.
Oh, go to your calendar. It's in your calendar.
In my calendar.
So click on your 9 a.m. meeting and it'll be in there.
I have an 8 a.m. for vision prep and I have nothing. It says we'll receive email link. They had nothing that went into my calendar. And I went on the vision app and there's nothing in my calendar. My calendar won't even go this far.
yeah,
So I have
mine just
nothing.
ended up in my calendar. I don't know how.
Yeah,
I had a
have
second
nothing.
link that showed up.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I don't know how to forward this to you.
Yeah, because I have no way of getting the last email I got is that they would be sending me a link and they never sent me one.
Well, that's yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, I'll send you a link now.
Okay. Yeah, they sent me an email. They'd be sending me a link and never got an email with a link.
And it shows for 9 a.m.
Okay. And that's probably my time zone off by an hour because I put the other one in my Outlook calendar so I'd have it to remind me to do it today.
Yep. All right. Well,
and it also might be that calendar is through the Outlook portal and not on my computer because it's all through the school. And Outlook on my computer doesn't like that one. And so they won't talk to each other and it's a mess.
And there you are.
Yes. All good stuff.
You know, if there's so I basically have a little tiny window with all your video faces on it.
Oh, you can make that bigger.
That's what I'm trying. And
so if you go at the top of that window, you'll see a 1 dash, you'll see kind of a more square, and then you'll see 2 dashes or 3 dashes, right?
Yeah.
You should have the 2 or 3 dashes highlighted, right?
Right.
So then all you do is that's a box. So you can move that box on any of your screens by grabbing the top bar of it and then go to the lower right-hand corner and it'll let you expand it normally.
Yeah, no little expansion arrow is showing up.
It might be because there's only 3 of us, but it will let you do that.
Okay. So as we get more.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because when you're sharing your screen, they only let each window be about this size, but it'll hold up to 42 people.
And it just gets bigger and bigger.
After that, it's pages. So you go to the lower right and page to the next page.
Okay, cool.
So you can have 300 people with the camera on. You're just not going to see them all at once.
Right.
But what it does do is people with their cameras on are prioritized towards the front. So if someone's just there and just has their name, they're going to be on one of the subsequent pages. And then if they're talking, they get moved further up. So the more participation they have, the closer they are to the front of your people.
Yeah, right on.
When you have multiple, when you have a lot of stuff going on. So
have you used the webinar version versus meeting yet? Yeah, I mean, it's very similar. There's just, there's a lot of stuff that you can change on this platform, which means that there's a lot of ways to set it up to make it look different.
I like this platform. Of all the ones I've used, I've been the happiest with this. I've not used the webinar form, but I've used this form of it a lot. And I've used some other webinar forms that have just been lack of controls. You can't use a virtual background, or you can't put different things in, or you can't see your audience. You can't, Zoom seems to do a pretty good job. We're not sure how I'm going to do the webinar yet because I really don't want to set up a second Zoom account for myself and my school account doesn't have webinar. And right now, all my
Mm.
computers automatically log into my existing Zoom account. So until I have to teach a
You'll
Zoom
cross that bridge
class
when
for
you get to
this-
it.
What's that?
Cross that bridge when you get to it.
Yeah, or I may make Tim set it up for me. Just like I set up all these for Tim, so it may be payback time.
Well, so what Sandra's been doing is changing who has the license.
Right.
Every time it's your turn to teach, then you get the license, and so then you'll have a different account. You'll just need to give them a different email that's different than the one you're using for this account.
Right. And see, I have my school email, which is this account, and then I have my personal email.
Yeah, so just use your personal, and she can, for that week, you'll be the host.
Right. And I wonder, and see, what I'm not sure of is if we can just link it to my school account I already have and just add webinar to it, but maybe not, because we probably don't have controls at that level to add it because it's an EDU account. I don't know.
Right.
But that's, so like I said, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it, but I have an in-person class scheduled in April. I still got to find my EVAP book. I haven't found which box it's in yet. Well, I packed up my office for remodeling, then they throw me an EVAP class and I haven't taught it before. So it's like, I should probably look at the book. I got the power.
You would think, right?
Yeah.
Tim's probably got that in PDF. He can send that to you.
Yeah.
It's true.
And I know I have it in paper. It's just
Yeah.
spots.
Where is it though?
Yeah. Yeah. Cause I mean, all my bookshelves, everything in here got taken out. So I've got stuff. The other desk got taken out. I mean, so I have just stuff everywhere, and it's not going to get better till we get done with this. I still have a door to take out and frame in a wall, and then it's going to get flooring and baseboard. Then things start coming
And this
back.
is at your house?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you have to use the room at the same time, right?
Right. So, which has been interesting with the contract, because like you guys can't make loud noise before 10 Monday through Thursday. So I had to set that up going in, and they like to be early, right? So they've been great. I mean, we've had a couple of minor incidents, but they've been great with all the subs there, because we added a room the other side of this, because my office used to not, although it's under the roof of the house, you either had to go on the patio or go through the garage to get into the office. And what we did is we enclosed part of the back patio that was already underneath the roof and part of the original foundation of the house into a family room, and the door that goes from my office to there, now I'll be able to come into here, which will make a big difference for HVAC and everything else.
Oh, sure.
And just not feel like I'm going out to the dungeon, and so, but we're just doing a lot of stuff. So we're redoing the patio outside my office because I have a little courtyard and stuff. That's all getting redone. We got the retaining walls in. We're going to do concrete next. So I got to move stuff off. So until I get the door that we've never used coming from the garage to that patio clear, I can't get rid of the door that's in the office from the garage. Otherwise, I can't bring groceries in. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So this has been going on. The planning started in June. So
Oh boy.
4.5 months for the county of San Diego to get a permit through. So we didn't get our permit till December, and then the contractor moved pretty quick on it. So he's basically done with that. The tile guy's in today, setting the last of the Travertine today. Then we'll get it grouted and sealed. So that'll be another week or two. My new stove is due next week. I pick up my new sink today, and we pick the granite, so we're getting the countertops done. So it's just, while I'm home, instead of trying to do things by remote and my wife going completely nuts.
Yeah.
This way I'm kind of here to herd the cats.
Perfect.
So that's
Nice.
decided, as long as I'm home, time to make home a little nicer.
And what's Tim's home remodeling adventures been like during COVID?
I got a new pillow for the trailer.
Yeah. All right. That's it.
It's nice. It's leather, little throw pillow thing for the couch. It's nice.
Nice.
And I bought a little French press. So I've been spending money.
Nice. And I wonder, are you hardwired in there, Tim?
No.
No Wi-Fi. Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty
Yeah.
solid. Good
Yeah,
morning.
it bit me a little Monday morning. Mark can attest to that. I was a little fuzzy. I had to go in and get my family off the internet.
Ah,
Oh, really?
Yep, I'm a bad
I'm at my
man.
daughter's house on her internet, so we'll see how this works.
yeah.
Yeah, I never have an issue here. My wife will stream YouTube, get on the phone with your store and everything else. I've never had an issue here, but I'm hardwired.
Well, my son-in-law is a computer geek. He does builds computers, does gaming, all kinds of crazy stuff, and I'm figuring they probably got enough bandwidth to handle me. And she's working from home too, so
Yeah. What's
I think
amazing to me is, I mean, especially working in public institution, is how many, public teachers at the college are complaining that they had to pay the money to upgrade the internet, so they should be reimbursed. I'm thinking to myself, talk about looking at one side of the coin. You're not driving to work anymore. You're saving money on gas. That's not part of the conversation. It's how do I get the extra $40 a month my internet's costing me and the school should pay me. It's just amazing how people that have never had to buy their own tools or never had to solve their own problems see things. And it's just hilarious. And I give them crap about it.
yeah, he's a music teacher, but the teachers are working at the school, even though the school is mostly empty, and then they just do everything on Zoom or whatever they do.
Yeah,
So,
they don't. I got to go to school yesterday because I had to check in a bunch of stuff and do so. I was allowed to be there for, oh shoot, as long as I've been there since COVID. I was there from 9:30 to 2. So that's the longest I've been allowed on campus. I had 2 instructional assistants, and we were just doing housekeeping and organization. So we don't do any streaming from there and don't have any students there. So we're still shut down. Hopefully by September, I'll get to go back and play with students in the lab again.
Yeah, we're up and running. We never shut down at the college I'm working at
Where's that
for
at?
in person. Pima Community College in Tucson.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so ours is it's not really lecture based. It's basically individual modules on
Okay.
cars or on units that you have
Like
to.
ATEC trainers, console lab, that kind of stuff.
Not really. It's all they're all made specifically by the teachers at the college, and there's a few of those. Like there's one of Bernie's old big boards.
Okay.
It's like a giant version of the one we have for our lab scope class, but
The E-trainer.
the e-trainer. Yeah. So yeah, it never shut down. It basically just it was one of I think that and construction technology and machine tool and welding. I think they're the only thing that's in person, and social distancing and masking and temperatures before everybody gets allowed on campus and all that. But everything else is virtual. Every single thing else in the entire school is virtual.
Yeah, my nephew is
4 programs up and running.
My nephew's going to school down in Tucson at the university there, or whatever. He's there on rugby scholarship. So they're still doing rugby practice. They're still doing all that stuff. And he's there. He got COVID like his first week there from his girlfriend's roommate. So,
yeah.
And I asked him how he's doing. He says, I'm really bored.
Yeah.
Because he's an athlete, really healthy and, 19. So he's like, it's like I have a cold and I'm really bored, he says.
yeah, my nephew, this kid's a stud. He's like 6'6", like 240 pounds. I think he's got 3% body fat. And he played high school football, and he went to Rolla to engineering school, university down there. And I asked him, I said, "You going to play football?" And he said, "Well, they never said anything." I said, "Just walk on. I mean, you could play there, especially maybe they give you some money." And he goes, "Nah, Uncle Mark, I don't want to play it. My schooling is going to be hard and da 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 da." And he's kind of a gentle kid. I mean, don't get me wrong, he'll rip your head off, on the field, but he wouldn't hurt anybody off the field. And so he shows up at Christmas, and he's got this big freaking shiner. And I'm like, "Somebody dot your I for you? What happened there?" And he goes, "Oh, I was playing rugby." And I'm like, I'm like, dude, I'm going to stick my boot right up your ass. You wouldn't play football with pads and a helmet, but you go play rugby. You lost your mind. And
Yeah.
he's just laughing, and I'm like, all right, whatever.
Yeah, Mike, I have two nephews, both are real athletic. Their dad went to college on a baseball scholarship and roomed with a lot of guys that played pro, triple A, double A, and one of them even made it to the majors. Of course, he had his engineering degree after 5 years, and everyone else just was somewhere on a farm team and never got their degree because he figured he's a catcher too tall with bad knees. He ain't making it to the pros. I'm getting an education. But his boys played everything: basketball, football, baseball, everything going through. And they did good in every sport. And the oldest really liked rugby, and that's where he ended going. The youngest is one of the top catchers in the state in California, and he's what is he, class of 22, so junior this year. And he is just had a write up in one of the high school who's who, where they go in magazines and some video and stuff like that. So, but he's been playing, and they go to Arizona to play, and he's been playing up there. So he is a junior. He is 5'11" and 190 pounds and like 0% body fat. I mean, he just, it's all about the sport.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad they didn't have rugby when I was in high school, because I would have took the pads off and went and played that, because you could definitely do some damage there.
Oh, absolutely.
But
well, hey, I'm gonna let you guys go. Tim, before our next meeting, I'm gonna get the link sent out for the Monday. I was gonna wait till this one got going, and that way people don't get confused and click on the wrong link. So I was waiting till after this one started, and I'll get the Monday link out.
Okay.
That was my master plan of procrastination.
Yeah, that's kind of how I was reading it, but I was going to let you get away with it.
Yeah, well, I could have done it, but I thought after the confusion last time, I'm going to hold off and send it after this one starts.
All right. Well, then I'll have another one for you Monday or Tuesday after the Monday's meeting.
Yeah, I'm going to start having to hit you up for executive pay here or something. I don't know, man. This is
right.
A lot of office work.
I'll swap you your paycheck for mine.
Oh, okay.
Then I'll put on a room edition.
Any of my paychecks or anyone in particular?
No, just annual average.
Oh, now oh man, no, that's not such a good deal. I said, because I get some pretty small paychecks. I'll swap one of those for one of your big ones.
Mm-hmm. See you soon.
Yeah. Speaking of which, today's payday. I have to go let's see if people put money in my bank. I love the end of the month. See ya.
Bye now.
Yeah. As soon as I find the button.
hey, Tim, I do have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Explain an oxygen sensor operation to technicians. Now, I have the Bernie Thompson videos that he did years ago that talk about, from a chemical standpoint, how you break the oxygen down, how it transfers through. And I've used that, and usually people glaze over when I do it. Do you guys have a way of not oversimplifying it, but making it so these guys understand, and then they get the idea, the theory and operation of it?
Well, we find that there's too many arguments about how oxygen sensors actually work, whether or not they actually sense oxygen. I
don't think they do from what I've seen of the chemistry standpoint of them.
Yeah, it's a good thing you asked that question after Brian got off, because he's actually built a test bench and flowed a bunch of other gases through and watched oxygen sensors react. But our theory is we won't, in our manuals, we don't want to talk about anything that won't actually stick money in a technician's pocket. So we stick to how to test them, and we really stay away from how they work. It's just like, oh, you got to treat the heater circuit like an actuator, but the sensor itself it's going to generate a voltage, and whether our explanation of the presence of oxygen or the differential of oxygen between the sample and the exhaust is whether that's accurate or not. We're not really all that concerned because it's a functional definition for diagnostics. So
Yeah, it kind of came up again this week, and we were doing some filming, and one of the instructors was kind of explaining it, and I'm like, yeah, that'll work. I said, but here's what I say. And he says, I know what you say, but that's too much for these guys to understand. And I'm like, I'm not going to argue with you. I believe you're right. I mean, I kind of look at it, like I said, like Bernie does, but not everybody has got an engine machining perfectionist background like myself that's got to know exactly how everything works and how it's put together and know all that in order to fix something. So, that's just kind of my cross to bear, so to speak. And
yeah,
not everybody has to do that, but
yes, yeah, you have my sympathy.
Find a happy medium. Yeah, I'm the guy you want fixing your stuff. You just don't want to talk to me about how I did it.
You're right.
So
yeah.
And then I thought, there's 9 of us. We all need to be singing the same tune. So we got to figure something out. Something that everybody can be happy with.
Yeah. Well, all I know is oxygen sensors are magic and you diagnose them with lab scopes. That's all I got.
Unless it's an air fuel ratio sensor, then you use your scan tool.
Then use the scan tool. No, you spend 4 hours building a little test harness and shielding it from interference and putting a micro amp clamp around it.
No,
I've done that. And
I'm
the
sure,
guys in the class are like, wow, that's really cool, but I'm never going to do that.
Yeah. No customer's going to pay me twice the value of the air fuel sensor to test it.
Yeah. Look right here, guys. See this voltage? See this voltage? See this current? Watch this. See that change? Just added air. I actually caught it on the Ford when our sales guys were driving Fusions. I caught it one time with the scope, and the oxygen came into the engine so fast on a snap throttle that the AF sensor just saw nothing but oxygen for just a microsecond of time, and then it went rich. And it was like, I thought that was the coolest thing ever, and the guys in the class are like, whatever. Yeah, whatever. I said, check that out. And they're like, oh, cool.
looks like we're getting some more folks joining us.
Mark Isaac.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
At least I imagine it's morning where everybody's at. Still morning here.
No, most of these guys are Australian.
Mm-hmm.
It's tonight.
Yesterday.
Yeah, most of us are central time zone.
Yeah, the most of us are.
Everybody but Bill. Hey, Mark.
I'm
Isaac.
Eastern, I'm Mark.
I'm trying to find the loudest thing I can do. I open up these Fritos. Nothing but the best. Right?
Yeah.
There's the breakfast.
Breakfast of champions.
Yeah. Well, Fritos and a stale beer that's been open since last night, right?
Ooh, now we're talking. Yeah.
Keeping it clean on company time.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
like this guy already.
Yeah, and not everybody can put vodka in their water bottle and get you convinced.
Yeah.
Hey, this isn't Detroit.
Hey, I told Chuck one time, that's our boss, I said, you know the greatest thing about working from home? He goes, no, what's that? And I said, day drinking.
Oh, no.
I swear he thought I was serious.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's mixed with your orange juice there?
Not telling.
Mm-hmm. Right on. So how many folks are we expecting this morning? Are we it?
I think 12. I think 12 plus us, so 14.
Okay.
How many are there?
4.
Well, you got to scroll down.
Scroll down. Oh, okay. I need to make this window bigger and it's not letting me.
3, 4,
Isaac, I think
There
we
we
missed
go.
the email about the backdrops.
11, 12. 12, yeah.
Ah,
12.
Now I can get some more to fit
Oh,
in
the
here.
backdrops. Yeah, I got the office as a backdrop.
I have this public restroom as a backdrop.
Yeah,
Mhm.
from the can.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Trying to get things organized here, and this window is growing as everyone starts showing up. So give me a second. Are we gonna be using chat much? Do I need to worry about that? Or are we just gonna be yakking?
Yeah. Chat doesn't get used much, but
Okay.
but keep it up if you can.
I'm gonna put it over there.
That's yeah.
Okay, so I'm looking at you. I'm gonna be teaching mostly like that, but say something because you're over here on this screen. When you got a question for me. How's that?
Sure. Well, you guys are in for a treat today because Rick's got a real gift for communication and creating a good flow. So even though it's a basic air conditioning class, and that's not the sexiest topic ever, there's gonna be some good discussion. So you guys will enjoy it, or else.
Or
I'm glad to
else.
see you got the guy from Arizona to teach the air conditioning class. That
Heck
probably
yeah.
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I was hoping he'd pick that one.
Hey, good morning, Rick and Tim.
Good morning.
Running a bit late. True that everybody's here. I know the link came out last week. I had a couple messages. There was a link, so I'm responding to those guys right now. So just a second.
No worries.
Dave.
I keep my camera up towards the top because I'm not wearing any pants, so I didn't figure you guys wanted to see that.
Hey, same here.
Yeah, my camera didn't turn on here. I have to figure that out.
Boys are just kind of hanging free today, you know?
Too much information, but that's all right.
Don't forget to turn your camera off when you go to the bathroom, Mark.
Yeah.
What's that?
Don't forget to turn your camera off when you go to the bathroom.
Oh, hell, it's not anything anybody else hasn't seen.
So we're just missing one of our guys is going to be out today. He's doing a presentation for a customer, a webinar. So we'll be one short. All right, here's Dave.
Somebody out fishing?
Yeah, Dave's not here.
I'm here.
Man,
There he is.
Dave's not here, man.
Man.
He forgot to put up a virtual background. No, he forgot to get in it.
Okay, here's John. All right. Good. Should be good.
Nice, John.
That ceiling fan is doing a number on your virtual background.
Why am I upside down?
That's a good question. Flip your computer over.
Yeah,
Your background's right.
Oh, that's weird.
probably in your settings, video settings.
I'm gonna turn it off and
I told you they were in Australia.
Yes, that's it.
Down under.
I'll try to fix it. I didn't mean to be the distraction quite this early.
All right, Rick, we should be good to go.
All right.
I'm going to check out and check back in and sort out my camera issue, but I'll be right back. You can go ahead and start.
All right. Sounds good. So welcome everybody. Air conditioning fundamentals. And so with that, I just wanted to go over some of the objectives of this course, right? And one of the things that we really want to kind of have a theme, the overall theme would be setting them up for the diagnostics that we get into in more depth in the next class. And the big thing is we want them to understand how systems work with that thought of how do we use that for diagnostics, right? So there's always going to be this underlying diagnostic discipline, this diagnostic method that we introduce as we go through the slides, but we don't dive headfirst into it. We're keeping that in a separate class, right? So we're going to basically go over how air conditioning works, a brief introduction into this two systems approach, and talking in more depth about how refrigerant flows, what they have to understand about refrigerant handling, as well as the second system, the air flowing inside the car through the heater case, things like that. And then we'll finally finish that up with actual servicing and performance testing, right? Which is the thing that they need to do to be able to start that diagnostic process going. Okay. Now we start off asking a question: what is air conditioning, right? And to give them a little background on it, we should introduce the fact that we use these different refrigerants, right? And so we want them to understand that we don't have any type of like evaporative cooling or any of that, or it's just air that's moving, that's trying to evaporate sweat off their body, right? It's not that is causing the cooling effect to happen, right? We have to be able to exchange that heat out of the interior of the car, and we use that with these specific chemicals that we circulate through the air conditioning system, right? Now we started this way back in the day with R12, and when I was getting started, the transition was starting after I had already started my career into R134, and we're once again making another transition into alternative refrigerants. R1234YF seems to be the one that is kind of becoming front and center as far as refrigerants are going. There are some alternatives, and we'll talk about that as well. We won't be talking about R12. Those systems are so old at this point. I still see them coming into the shop. That's just because cars last a really long time here in the desert Southwest where I live. But that doesn't mean that you don't need to understand how R134 is different from R12 from 1234YF. The differences are minor, right? It's more of we need to know what to use to service this vehicle, not necessarily the big picture of the diagnostic approach. It's not really going to be affected by which refrigerant is in the system. Okay. One thing we want to talk about is how air conditioning doesn't work, right? It's not, hey, I've got cold air and I blow it on your face, right? It's not that I'm using an evaporative cooler, which actually they did use those at some point early on in automotive history, right? It's about taking the air that is hot inside the vehicle and cooling it down by letting the heat move from the air into the refrigerant and exchanging that, transferring that heat out to the vehicle, right? And we're going to be using this term latent heat to describe that process, right? And so we've got some ways that we can try to describe that to the students, right? To get them to understand the process of moving heat from one thing to another, right? And one of the things that Tim introduced me to is that these simple canned air or air dusters, and that pretty much everybody has seen, allow us to be able to show that happening, right? We need to understand that these things are not really compressed air that are inside of them. A majority of these actually have tetrafluoroethylene, which is the same thing as R134A, right? As a propellant inside here, right? So it makes it really easy to use this as a method to be able to show this transfer of heat, right? Some people are really surprised by the fact that they're putting R134 into something that I'm spewing into the atmosphere, since if you know anything about our industry, you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to vent this stuff, but these seem to be able to get by with that. Back in the day when R12 was in use, it was a very common propellant as well for things like hairsprays and things like that. Okay. Now, how can we illustrate this to the students in the class about this heat transfer, right? One thing they may have noticed if they've used these cans is if you spray for a long period of time, you'll notice that the feel of the can itself starts to get cold. In fact, you can actually hold the trigger for so long that it kind of stops spraying, right? It kind of loses its propulsion after a while, right? If we get some instruments involved, the same kind of instruments that you might have in your toolbox and are in common use in our industry, right? We can actually show this happening. And this is where we, if you guys are inclined to do in the class, with a can of air and something like an infrared thermometer, you can actually demonstrate this for them, right? We'll basically take a can that's been sitting for a while and has equalized with room temperature. In this case, it was 84 in my garage when I did this little experiment. So shot the temperature of it, sprayed it for 10 seconds to see if there was any change in temperature, right? And it did. It dropped 10 degrees in temperature just from holding that trigger for 10 seconds straight, okay? What's happening inside this can? How can we use this to show them how heat transfer works, right? Inside the can, we've got some liquid and some gas, right? And when we let that can sit and equalize to the temperature of its environment, it reaches an equilibrium, right? And that equilibrium is when there's certain pressure built up in the can that allows some of it to be in a gas state with the remaining refrigerant as a liquid, right? The reason that it is a liquid inside of the 30-pound containers or the 12-ounce containers that we have for R134 is because of pressure. Because if it was in atmospheric pressure conditions, it would evaporate, just like when we squeeze the trigger and the gas escapes and basically turns invisible where we can't see it anymore, right? You can kind of show them that there's liquid there because you can kind of gently shake that can a little bit and feel it sloshing, right? Now, do make sure that you point out that this is specifically on the label. You're told not to shake the can up. I would say just kind of gently sway it side to side. We don't want to vigorously shake it up and introduce more heat back into that system that increases the pressure substantially, right? When I did this experiment, you could tell it was a fairly full can. It was about, I approximate about 3/4 full of liquid and about 1/4 full of gas, right? And that will basically start to change as you let that gas escape. You'll have more gas and less refrigerant to equalize that pressure. Okay. But what made that temperature change? What made the outside of the can basically turn from 84 degrees to 74 degrees just by letting the gas escape? Okay. Well, when we let the gas escape off the top of the refrigerant, right? Imagine the liquid is heavier. It's sitting on the bottom. The top part is where the gas is. We let the gas escape off the top. It lowers the pressure in the can while we're doing that. And when it lowers the pressure, now we can actually see that liquid could start to boil. And when it boils, the thing that's making it boil is the temperature. Heat goes into it to make it boil. Think of boiling a pot of water on the stove, right? We put heat into it, it starts to boil. It changes state from liquid to gas. And by releasing the pressure, we're allowing that heat transfer to take place, okay? R134A will basically boil at 15 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit, right? So whenever we let the gas out, it'll start boiling. Okay, and that's what's happening. And that boiling point is what allows us to be able to transfer this heat. And the refrigerants that we use are specifically engineered to be able to take advantage of that. One way to illustrate this as well is I basically made up a top for a mason jar. I've 3D printed that. I designed that in a CAD CAM program and 3D printed that so I could hook up a hose to my vacuum pump, right? We put some warm water in it, and you can see that I've got some liquid in the bottom and I've got gas on top, right? But this, of course, is all at atmospheric pressure. And the reason we don't use water for this type of process is the temperatures that this works at is not in a zone that would be able to transfer heat out of the interior air, because water is not a suitable chemical for this type of process, right? Let me just kind of show you this video real quick to show you what that process is like here and how it's the same as that can that we were just using. Okay, so we've got this water is warm water. It was about 112 degrees when we first started. And when we put it under vacuum, we're basically lowering that boiling point to where it's boiling at approximately half of the temperature that it would normally boil at, right? 212 is where it would normally boil. As that continues for a while, you'll notice that the temperature starts to drop. And the reason that's happening is what's boiling the water? The heat, and it's pulling heat from the outside air, pulling heat from the glass jar, and that heat transferring into the vapor lowers the temperature of those surrounding components, right? The liquid drops in temperature, the vessel that's holding it drops, the surrounding air drops as well, okay? And eventually, you'd be able to see this temperature drop to the point that it stopped boiling, where it reaches equilibrium, or with a strong enough vacuum, it would continue to boil until there wasn't any water left. Okay, we'll come back around to this as well. This same philosophy when we're talking about evacuation, right? When we're trying to evacuate moisture out of an AC system. Okay. I just wanted to take a moment at this point to ask for feedback or questions or anything about this kind of visual approach to this.
Well, if what would help, because this will blow their minds too early in the presentation, I think, if we could show a chart like of boiling points of different liquids. What I've done before is take like a column where it's water, and you show 212, and you show a column of alcohol, and it's like 100 and something. And you just keep showing different chemicals that say these things all have different boiling points.
Right.
When we get to something that can remove heat from an environmental chamber like an evaporator,
right,
we have to use refrigerants that have boiling points well below zero, because this blows their minds. I mean, they just, I've had guys hold the jar, I'll turn the pump on, and they'll drop the jar because they see it boiling.
Oh, and they think it's so hot. Yeah.
So we have to kind of do a correlation of pressure to boiling point. And then once we establish the pressure, atmospheric water boils at 212.
Right.
When we start lowering the atmospheric, then it starts lowering the boiling point. And then we can, I think that kind of helps. I've done that before.
Yeah, if you're gonna do the boiling point thing, I agree with Mark. We also need to have the pressure chart to go with it.
Yeah, right on.
Because that's the part that just gets them freaked out. They think boiling is hot, and it's the term reason for boiling is really not boiling like they think. It's just going from liquid to gas.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, boiling with R134A would actually give you frostbite, right? I mean, that's the thing. Yeah. So I mean, we've got a few things there, and I'll see if I can put together a chart, and we can drop that in to the slides here somewhere.
It's a good video, definitely the visual. Yeah.
Right. Well, we want to tie this, which is something they understand with water and boiling point, to the refrigerant, right? And what's happening inside the can, because, we want to be able to take that next step and ask, well, couldn't I just take a whole bunch of these cans of canned air and cool a car off, right? Could I take each can and wrap it in fins and blow air across it, right? And transfer the heat from the air into the can, right? we could, but the problem is that you're going to run out of refrigerant, right? So what we need to do is have a way to capture that refrigerant that we let escape and stuff it back into the can and recirculate it, right? And that's where we transition from this to what's actually happening inside an automotive refrigeration system, right? And of course, the thing that we use to stuff it back in is going to be a compressor, right? So we're going to basically capture that refrigerant and we're going to stuff it back into the can. So we want to introduce that and tie it together so that they understand those systems. We also, at this point, want to introduce them to this approach, which is, I've attended a lot of AC classes in my time. I've done a lot of AC work in my time because of where I live. I mean, it pretty much happens year round here in Tucson. So I have a lot of experience, and I have fallen prey to not thinking that anything other than a refrigerant system problem could be the source of why this person's complaining about their AC not being cold, right? And so we just always want to keep in mind that there are two systems, right? There's the airflow that moves the air past the evaporator and to the correct destination, and that goes hand in hand with the refrigerant system, right? We've got two complete separate systems working in conjunction with each other, right? And that faults can be in either one. And I have seen literally technicians, I have been that technician that has spent way too much time and money, customers' money too, right? Trying to fix a problem on the refrigerant side when the problem was on the airflow side, right? We want to make sure that we kind of beat this up a little bit and keep kind of mentioning it again as we go through each of these slides, right? Okay, because this is the kind of thing where, yeah, I'll agree. Most of the problems probably do happen on the refrigerant side, but if we, as technicians, put our blinders on and never, look side to side, we're going to miss these obvious types of problems, right? Okay. All right, so let's dig deeper into that refrigerant system itself. The thing that we want to do is to kind of reintroduce this or continue with the discussion with the can of air or can of refrigerant, if you will, right? Could we, in a way, make that work as a automotive air conditioning system? Well, if we had a way of condensing that refrigerant and we had a way of actually making the valve work backwards, where the valve would control what goes into the can, where we were getting that change in temperature, that heat absorption from changing it from a liquid to a gas, we'd be able to kind of stuff that can back full again, right? But we would need a way to circulate it back to the compressor and stuff it back in, right? And so how does that work? Well, you notice the can has a valve on it, right? And we have a valve in these systems, right? And these valves are just like the valve on that can, are variable, right? They're not just on or off, not just opened or closed, right? But we can open it a little bit or we can open it a lot, depending on how much refrigerant we need flowing into the can, so to speak. Well, we don't really have a can. We have something that's way more efficient at transferring heat. That's an evaporator, right? So this valve would be very similar to something like your blowgun at work, that you can squeeze the trigger a little bit and get a little bit of air out, squeeze it a lot and get a lot of air out, and let go and it shuts off, right? So, the main purpose here is I want to kind of, as an introduction, have them understand how these things work so that they understand that there's something that's familiar to them. If they've never really understood how a thermal expansion valve works, things that are familiar to them to kind of introduce this concept of controlling flow of refrigerant through this system, okay? The flow starts with vapor, low pressure vapor coming into the compressor, right? And that compressor then raises the pressure. and only dealing with vapor or gas. I will kind of use those terms interchangeably throughout this. So, you know, whatever you hear gas or vapor, just understand they mean the same thing. We'll then need to condense that into a liquid, right? Remember that inside that can, we had liquid, and it was the liquid that changed to gas that allowed us to absorb that heat transfer, that latent heat transfer into the refrigerant from the air that we circulate through it. So we have to condense that now into a liquid, send it to our valve, and then however much refrigerant we need flowing through the evaporator, we can control that by, you know, basically squeezing or opening and closing that valve. And once we go through the evaporator, of course, we boil the refrigerant, turns it into a gas, and we circulate it back through. Now that is not really a valve that we have. It's not really a blowgun. We would use something like a thermal expansion valve. This is an H block. We'll have some discussion about that in particular coming up. And that is the valve that is being used to regulate flow. Regulating flow in these systems allows us to have just the right amount of refrigerant in the evaporator, depending on how hot the air is, how much air we're blowing across the evaporator. Now, we also need some other stuff in this system to make it functional. This would work, okay, but we could get contaminants that circulate through this system. We could get moisture that circulates through that system, and the way we deal with that is by putting a receiver dryer in. They call it, you know, technically a refrigerant storage device. It does many things, right? It separates out liquid and gas. It contains a desiccant to be able to absorb moisture, and we'll get into these in more detail coming up, right? Receiver dryer is the term that we use for those, and they're basically cylindrical in shape and allow us to be able to fill them up with liquid refrigerant and filter it, dry it, and pass through only the liquid from that point forward, right? Now, this is one type of system, okay? A thermal expansion valve system allows us to control or regulate flow of refrigerant by opening and closing a little valve that regulates the flow. We also have systems that have a fixed orifice. This fixed orifice is just one size. And so you would imagine that only a certain amount of refrigerant can flow through at all times, okay? Well, that's not the case. We have to still control the flow of refrigerant through these systems, right? Now, this metering device, this refrigerant storage device, we still need those, okay? They work differently, they look different, okay? It's the kind of thing that you may have seen if you've done any work on any of these. And this system uses an orifice tube that includes a small filter screen. It includes an accumulator, and that does some of the same work that a receiver dryer did, but its main job is to separate out liquid refrigerant, so only vapor or gas makes it past and gets to the compressor. So because these systems work differently, and we'll get into both of them in more detail, right? We have to move that major component to the other side of the evaporator because we're having it do a different job. Does it still filter? Yes. Does it still have a desiccant? Yes. Okay. But the main thing is it's separating the liquid and the gas and only allowing gas to pass, whereas the receiver dryer separates liquid and gas and only lets liquid pass. Okay. Now the big thing that's happening here, regardless of the system that's using, we're going to stick with the thermal expansion valve system, is where we're dealing with temperature and heat transfer, right? Now, so far when we were talking about our can, let me get my little laser pointer here involved. Let's see, you guys can see that. Yep. So we've been talking about up to this point the transfer of heat into the refrigerant. Okay, that's all well and good, but how do we get rid of that heat so that we're ready to absorb some more? Okay, We do that by transferring the heat back out of the refrigerant in the condenser to the outside air. This is the concept that gets a little more difficult for students to wrap their head around, right? How can we do that? How can we take heat that is being transferred inside of a car at 60 degrees and transfer it to the outside of the car, which is 115 degrees, right? And it's all about the refrigerant itself in different states being able to go from liquid to gas and from gas to liquid. Okay, so let's look at some of the temperatures that you're likely to see as this heat transfer happens, right? We have approximately 35 degrees where it starts to enter into the evaporator. We're going to blow hot interior air across that evaporator, and the heat is going to move from the air into the refrigerant, and now the refrigerant is hotter, right? We're going to say approximately 50 degrees at that point, right? So we've absorbed some heat to change that refrigerant from a liquid to a gas. That gas then basically circulates around, may pick up a few more degrees of temperature as it moves through the lines, but it reaches the compressor as a low pressure, low temperature gas. The compressor then compresses the refrigerant, and it comes out hotter because of the extra pressure that's in that system. And let's say it comes out at approximately 180 degrees. When we then send that through a condenser, what we did is we raised the boiling point of that. So now I can take outside air, which is in excess of 100 degrees perhaps, and use that to condense the liquid, or condense it into a liquid, I should say, right? And that's, I think, the harder part to understand. It's the compressor's job to raise the boiling point of that refrigerant so that we can change it from gas to liquid. And then it's the job of the expansion valve to be able to lower the boiling point so we can then change it from a liquid to a gas.
Rick, this is where
Yes.
I think what Mark Isaac was talking about earlier would be handy, that chart that shows pressure and boiling point correlations, because I think that would make it easy for them to visualize what you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we'll stick it in right here around slide 25, right? So I mean, this is the concept that allows us to be able to transfer the heat from the air that's inside the car and transfer it to the outside of the car, even though the outside of the car is hotter than the inside of the car. And it's all about taking advantage of that latent heat transfer. It is, I think, fairly straightforward to understand how we can do it in the evaporator. It's more difficult to be able to understand how it happens at the condenser, right? But how do we condense a gas into a liquid? By cooling it, right? And that's exactly what we are doing inside the condenser. We're condensing that refrigerant from a vapor or gas into a liquid, okay?
We should make these guys watch that hillbilly show where they make moonshine. They could get this whole idea of condensing and liquid and
gases. There you go. Right.
Same thing they're doing. They're just drinking it when they're done.
Yeah.
Rick, I got a question.
Yes.
So you mentioned before that the valve, the T valve.
Yeah, thermal expansion valve.
Thermal expansion valve. Was responsible of converting that refrigerant into liquid. Well, what's it?
So its job is to change from a high pressure liquid to a low pressure liquid, right? That's
okay.
That is what changes its boiling point. Okay, right. So we're building up pressure behind it. It does cool down at that point, right? Only because of the volume is lower on one side than it is on the other, right? Because it's a restriction to flow, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Think about that can he was talking about. Damien,
What?
think about the can getting cold when you let that valve open.
Yeah, but I was thinking that it's safe to say then that the condenser also converts it from a state of gas to a state of liquid, right?
Exactly.
Right.
As it cools down.
It remains a liquid on both sides of the thermal expansion valve. Right.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
But one
Yeah.
side is high, one side is low pressure.
Right. Because of the pressure.
Okay, got it.
Just like at the
Thanks.
compressor, we've got low temperature coming in and high temperature going out because the pressure changed. We're just mechanically changing it, right? That's where we have to introduce something into the system. You know, the system won't just flow on its own. We need to push it around, and we also need that compressor to be able to increase the pressure so that we can change its boiling point at that point in the system. Okay. And this section here is an overview, right? And what we want to try to avoid from the students at this point are too many specific questions, because we are going to address those in more detail further on, right? These kind of questions you guys have had are perfect, right? But I know some of them might start saying, well, on this car with this valve, you know, what does this do, right? We always seem to get those questions that crop up in class, right? Just kind of understand that this refrigerant flow and airflow section that I'm about to get into are kind of a more simple overall look of how the system works. Where we will get into each of them in more detail, right? So we introduce the concept of latent heat. We give them an overview of the refrigerant system, an overview of the airflow, and then more detailed look at each of those. Is kind of how we've set this up. Okay. All right. So let's move on to. Let me take my laser pointer off. All right. So airflow part of the system, right? And this is where we move the heat around, or move the air around to get that heat absorbed out of the air so that it is cooler, right? And we direct it to the right place. Now, we've got different sources where the air can come from. We've got a blower motor that introduces the flow and controls the flow of air. We've got evaporators, heater cores, we've got blend doors, and this allows us to be able to send some or all of the air through a heater core, which has hot water circulating through it, to be able to control the temperature exactly where the customer wants. And then downstream of that, we've got doors that allow us to open it up and send it to the face vents, send it to the defroster, send it down to the heater, to the floorboard, even sometimes to rear passengers and things like that. So this is really a big key part of passenger comfort. And here's where we really need to kind of introduce this concept of the whole system. Both of these systems that we're talking about all ultimately have to end in the customer being happy with the comfort level inside the car, okay? That they have control over it, okay? We need to keep that climate exactly what they want, which may not be, you know, full max AC. It might be some AC, a little bit of heat, get the temperature exactly where they want it. Some people want, a little bit on the feet and a little bit on the face, and that's, more the better, right? Other people want it just on their face. And so it's all about that control. And the reason we bring this up is we need to understand that a customer will oftentimes come to you just saying my AC is not cold. We have to really dig sometimes to get a little more information to understand that might just be that it's not cold in the way that I want it to be. The temperature is not the way that I want it, right? Now, how do we cool the air? Well, we don't really cool the air. We take the heat out of the air, right? And that's the concept I think that we need to reinforce over and over throughout this class too, is that we're not, just manufacturing cold air. We're just taking heat out of the air that's already there. How do we do that? We take warm air in, we basically accelerate it, increase its velocity and volume, and with a blower motor, and send that across all of the fins, through the fins of the evaporator, where it can actually interact with the liquid refrigerant that's in that evaporator and boil it, right? And when that boiling happens, it turns into heat leaving the air and being absorbed by the refrigerant. Okay, and then downstream we send it to where we want, right? But it's all about this transfer of heat right here from the air to the refrigerant. That's the important thing. Okay, now what are the things that regulate this temperature? Well, how fast is that blower motor, right? How much volume of air is going across that evaporator? The more air volume, the higher the temperature of the air, right? That's going to require more refrigerant flow in order to move more heat from the air to the evaporator, right? And this isn't an infinite scale. You can't just keep going with this, blow the air faster and faster and faster and send more refrigerant through, right? It's all basically designed in to this system from the factory, right? As to how much basically heat it can transfer. Okay, our job is to make sure it can kind of do its best. I think we've all experienced some cars that the best from that car is not as good as another car. Okay, this was way more common back in the day, right? 70s and 80s era cars. It was way more common for some cars to just not do very well, even into the 90s, right? Anybody old enough to remember like mid 90s Astro vans with an R4, first year for R134? Tell me how good you could ever make those work. Anybody have an experience with those?
The Chrysler van, full-size vans were the worst.
Yeah.
You could,
Yeah.
if you could get that down to 70 degrees, you were lucky.
Yeah, I
That was
remember.
on a 75-degree day.
Yeah. Mark, I remember we had the first year that Dodge went to the scroll compressor
Yeah.
away from the Sandons, and the displacement of that scroll was not enough to keep up with the dual evaporator 15-passenger van.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah, the conversions
I mean, brand new, that thing struggled with both evaporators running. You couldn't get it, but it was that compressor. That compressor did not have the volume of a piston compressor. I remember that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's about 92.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, and I encourage you guys, I mean, I'm sure you do this already, but I always encourage you guys to bring your own personal experiences in, right, to these things, because that's really what makes our classes individualized and makes them even better, right, is to bring in our own personal experience into this stuff. But it makes the point that our job is not to make this particular car blow 32.5 degrees out of the vents and maybe icicles start to form, right? Cars may not be capable of doing that. Our job is to get it as good as it was ever designed to do, right? Now, where does the air come from that we need to cool, right? We can choose between fresh outside air coming in as well as recirculating air from the inside, right? And when the recirculation door is open and we start to draw air in from the interior of the car, it would make sense that this kind of builds on itself over time, right? I can get air coming in that has already been cooled, and I get to cool it again, right? So I should be able to get the temperature way lower with recirculation. Okay, and I can get the air cooler with it on the recirculation mode, right? So why would you ever want to use outside air? Well, one thing that I've had to explain to customers when they bring a vehicle into me that their complaint is it's not as cold as they would like, right? It's often used car that they've recently purchased, right? So they're unfamiliar with it. One of the things that with talking to them, I can oftentimes figure out is they're really not talking about the fact that it can't get cold, because what would usually happen is I run a battery of tests and it works, right? The system's full, the refrigerant is flowing as it should, there's no problems there, airflow is flowing as it should, the performance of the system is good, yet they complain about it. But what ends up happening sometimes is they just leave it on recirculation max AC all the time. Now, this might just be me where I live, right? And their complaint really is, hey, I jumped in my car, right? And I drove, 2 miles to the store and it wasn't cold. Well, consider this. I mean, it's not at all unusual, at least where I live, for interior temperatures to reach in excess of 165 degrees inside of a parked car sitting in the sun, right? Why would you want to start trying to cool that air when you could start with the outside air, which is 60 degrees cooler, cool that off, and when that starts to cool down, now we start recirculation, right? Many systems these days do this on their own, right? They've got automatic features that take care of this, but there's still quite a number of vehicles out there where the AC system is fully manual, and they just expect that max is max, and that's where I leave it all the time. Okay, so explaining this to customers sometimes has allowed them to be able to understand that, if I went straight to max, it's going to take longer to cool down than if I sucked in fresh air first, start to cool the interior a little bit, and then switch over to max. Okay. I don't know if you guys have ever experienced any of this where you live. I know, anybody here from the desert Southwest at all?
No, we're from the humid Midwest.
Right. So things are different for you guys, right? And so tell me, what's that like where you're at? I mean, the difference between a car sitting in the sun.
Oh, it's huge.
Does this work too? I mean, where you're at?
It's 150 in the interior, plus with a a humidity load of about 70 to 80% in the summer.
Right.
Yeah, at least.
So you really have to start with outside air.
Yep. So I've literally had some customers that had nothing wrong with their car, taught them, right? Cool your car down faster with this one simple trick, right? That's the tagline for the YouTube video, right? And that basically is, let's do outside air first, and then, when it starts to get a little bit cool, switch to recirculation, right?
I've seen guys down there where you live, Rick, driving their cars with oven mitts because the steering wheel's so hot you can't touch it.
Oh yeah, really common to put a towel over your steering wheel so that you can actually touch it when you get in the car. Sunshades are very popular, right? You go to the mall, go to the Home Depot, right? Wintertime, all the cars are parked right up as close to the building as they could possibly get. Summertime, they're spread out all over the entire parking lot underneath trees, right? And so that's just the way things go, because shade is a worth the walk. Okay. Yeah, it's crazy. You gotta keep the sun off to try to keep those interior temperatures down. People start to figure this out after a while. Okay. Now, how are doors like the recirculation door controlled, right? Many different mechanisms, right? It's kind of up to you as a technician to be able to figure out what is being used on the car that happens to be in your bay. This particular example uses cables, right? We've got a cable, and you can see that arrow pointing to that on the left there, where the cable goes to the door. You can see here where we've got the other end. That's going to be controlled by a lever on the dash, and pulls and pushes the cable and closes the door. This particular setup is interesting because you can do half C's like we're showing you here, right? Other types of systems don't really have that feature, but sometimes old school systems like this, which is not that old, by the way. I think this is like a 10-year-old vehicle. Is that old where you guys are at? Are they all rusted away by now?
Oh no, we see.
That looks a little older than 10 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's old Honda.
That looks like 80s version GM.
This is
It's Honda.
I think it's a Toyota.
Okay.
4Runner, I think. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, this could be customized where you want your air to come from, right? That source. We can also have systems, of course, that use electronic, that use vacuum, lots of different options for this. And again, we're just kind of introducing them to the types of things that they might look for, getting into them more specifically when we get into the next class. Okay. Now, all of this really comes down to controlling air source, right? What about how much air? Okay. The amount of air we send across the evaporator is an important aspect as well, right? And this comes down to how much air can I remove the heat from? How much air do I want to remove the heat from? Because ultimately I'm going to be blowing that on me. And when I blow it on me, the cool, dry air will, basically cool me off through evaporation off the surface of my skin, right? And sometimes too much cold, dry air can make you feel chilly, right? And so you might need to turn the blower down, reduce the volume of air. What we're, I think, more interested in are those things that can cause problems for the system that we have to investigate to try to piece together where that problem can be. What are the things that can contribute to a change or a reduction in volume, right? One of those would be something that's things that we should be getting in there and servicing regularly too, and that would be cabin filters, right? And we have to understand this, they can be in different places in the system, not on a particular car. It's not like on this particular car, there's 3 different places where they may have hidden the cabin filter. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is they can design a cabin filter in different places, right? One would be just bringing fresh air in, cabin filter is involved, but on recirculation mode, it's not. Others would be it is before it gets to the blower motor, so that all air coming in goes through the cabin air filter. It's kind of on the suction side, if you will, of the blower motor. Other times it would be between the blower motor and the evaporator. Okay. On some vehicles, it won't even be present at all. So that's one of the things we have to consider, because, again, to kind of keep them thinking about the diagnostics down the road, when we've got a problem with a cabin filter and it's reducing airflow, it could affect when it's reducing airflow depending on its location. Okay. If it was one that only filters fresh air, then you might have somebody complaining that the AC doesn't work well. You jump in, fire it up on max AC, and everything is perfectly normal for you. We need to encourage everybody to try all of the different vent positions and all the different speeds and all the different mode positions, right? To see if we can catch those. Okay. Now, why would this turn into a complaint of my AC isn't cold, right? Anything that's reducing the flow of air reduces how much heat we can transfer out of the air, which means we have less cool, dry air reaching me, which is, I'm the important part, right? And temperature is not really the indicator of that. Like vent temperature, sticking a thermometer in the vent is not really the way to measure that, okay? A lot of cold air may actually measure at a slightly higher temperature than a little bit of cold air. Has anybody here ever had a thermometer in the vent temp and turned it from high to low?
Yeah.
The temperature usually drops, right?
Right.
That often has to do with the fact that there's more time for that air to be in contact with the evaporator and transferring more heat. Okay. So we can't just go by what's the vent temp, right? I distinctly remember early in my career, sure, I went through lots of training in high school and at tech school after I graduated from high school. And, you get into the field and you start to, learning things from your coworkers and mentors. And I got to tell you, the guy that taught me air conditioning initially taught me one very critical thing that was wrong, right? His way of measuring AC performance was, let's go drive it down the road, right? 35, 40 miles an hour on low, on max, and see what I could get the temperature down to, the minimum temperature I could get, right? Which really has little to no bearing on how well the AC system worked. You could have AC systems that really were not fully charged. They were having other problems, and they would still pass that test with flying colors. Okay, so this temperature is not the best indicator of this, right? Now, what are some things besides a clogged cabin filter that could cause an evaporator, or I'm sorry, airflow to be reduced, right? And here's a great opportunity to kind of ask your students too, right? I like to introduce questions to kind of generate feedback from them, right? Some things that answers you should get, right? There's a problem with the blower; it's not spinning fast enough. The squirrel cage is full of junk and it's not, allowing it to move the air. The evaporator is clogged, right? Or it's frozen over with ice, right? Those types of things can really start to reduce the amount of air or even stop the airflow. Okay.
Yeah, Rick, I had
yeah.
one on a Pacifica one time that they brought to my house, and the blower motor wasn't spinning on any speed very well, and it turned out it was the resistor was bad. And so we put one in it, and it still didn't feel like it was getting enough air out of the vents.
Right.
So I pulled the cabin filter out, and of course it looked like a shag carpet.
Right.
And I'm pretty sure there was correlation between that filter being plugged, this thing not being able to draw air like it should, and taking out that resistor, because it's right there in the airflow.
Right. Well, so great point, right? Oftentimes blower motors will have a little tube, right, that comes off and goes up and connects, right? A little rubber tube. And what's that for?
Cool the motor.
Cooling air going to the motor, right? Motor gets hot due to reduced airflow. It's going to, basically start drawing more amperage. And the first thing that usually gets affected by that is the resistor, right? The resistor can burn out. You can get, melted connectors at the resistor, things like that. Okay. So yeah, I can certainly see a correlation between those two for sure. Yep, it's all related. That's like in our diesel classes when we talk about fuel filters getting clogged. They can clog and cause problems way before they cause drivability problems, because we're reducing the flow of fuel to cool the pump.
One of the things that I don't think people are understanding is, I don't know if they do it where you guys are at, but by us, you'll see dogs with people all the time. Like you go to the Home Depot, everybody's got their dog with them.
Yep.
And they're hauling their dogs around in their vehicles. Well, summer to winter, they shed. And I've pulled these cabin filters out, and it's like I could make a dog with the fur that's on this thing. And
man,
people don't
for
think
sure.
about that.
Yep, absolutely. And that could be something that brings a customer into you with the complaint that my AC is not cold, right? You stick a thermometer in the center vent and it's cold, right? But it's not keeping the passenger comfortable, right? And so that's really the key, right? And then the other thing that can cause that to be a problem is the air is going to the wrong place, even though it's cold and there's plenty of volume and the refrigerant side is fine. But if it's blowing out the wrong vent, or some of it is blowing out the wrong vent, they're really gonna, end up with problems, right? And I mentioned a question that you might pose for something like this: where would the air go with the vents in this position, right? And if you were expecting it to come out of the panel vents and it's coming out the floor instead, right, that's certainly gonna make you not very comfortable. My mind, when I think about these things, always goes back to early AC systems in cars, like way before our time even. They were just like air conditioning the air like a house does. They were just trying to cool the entire cabin air down. And they were blowing it out of roof vents, or it came out of a vent along the rear package shelf, and just kind of, let's just cool everything down in the cabin. My word, those things must have taken forever to actually make the interior of the car comfortable, because it was never blowing you in the face, so that you could get some of that evaporation off the skin, you know?
You talking like the old add-on systems where they'd go under the dash kind of things?
No, earlier than that, right?
Oh,
Stuff like in the 30s and 40s, you know, which I've never seen, just seen pictures of. Even into the 50s, I remember my dad had a 56 Ford, and I recall seeing that it was optional to have AC back then, and it basically blew air out the defroster. That's all it did. And so it was just expected to, you know, circulate around and cool the interior of the car down. Cross country trips maybe, right? But not a trip to the grocery store. And then just kind of a brief discussion of mode doors and what they're doing, what's their job, right? And their job is to direct traffic for the air, and send it where we want it, right? And I've put some colors in there to illustrate that we'll often want warmer air for defrost or for heater. You know, and some models have a bi-level feature. You can do heater vents and defroster vents at the same time. Quite often face vents, you know, we're looking more at air conditioned air. You know, just to get them thinking about these things have to work properly for that system to keep the customer happy, right? And that's ultimately what it comes down to. But what can go wrong with these systems, right? How can they fail? Well, if you've got doors that open and close, but they're not fully opening and closing, now we start allowing some of that air to go where it's not supposed to. And that's just wasted air, right? If I want all of the air blowing me straight in the face because it's really hot outside, and some of it's going out the floor vents, or some of it's going out the defroster vents, or, you know, anything like that, what can end up happening is I complain about it. And of course, if you're relying strictly on what's the thermometer tell me in the center vents, I may not catch that, right? And so again, when we get into the diagnostic class, we really have a structure that makes sure they check these things, and that it takes very little time, but we don't want to overlook it, right? Now, how do we control these doors? Right, well, we can control them just like we did with our recirculation door, right? In fact, this is the same thing that I showed you before, right? Let's see, little video that shows us the different modes that we can go through, and that basically goes through and operates a cam setup that moves the doors to different positions, right? We've got face, we've got bi-level, we've got floor, we've got floor and defrost, and we've got defroster only, okay, on this particular one. And that's very common, right? We see that type of setup frequently, okay? We can use vacuum actuators, okay? We can move the lever the same on the dash. We can push a button the same on a dash, but it may move a valve, send vacuum to a different spot, right? And these will have different types of faults that can occur with a vacuum system versus cable, okay? What's more common these days are electronics, right? And I think do you guys get a lot of more seasoned technicians in your classes, brand new technicians, a mix? What do you guys usually get in your classes?
Probably a little more on the more seasoned side, I think, what they see.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what you'll end up with is a lot of guys think that they're only going to see these on automatic AC systems, right?
No,
And that's one thing that we need to make sure that they understand, that that's not the case anymore, right? I would venture to say most manual systems these days are all controlled with electric actuators too, right? It's not just the realm of the automatic AC system these days. Now, how do these systems work? You know, what kind of signals would you expect to be going to those? Well, we've got an electric motor, right? And that electric motor can spin in two different directions to basically, through a series of gears, open and close a door. Okay. You may find that some of these are just motors with no feedback. Some are going to have feedback with sensors built into them. Some may use stepper motors. Okay. But you can determine that pretty quickly with wiring diagrams, right? You're able to kind of wrap your head around how this system works. On this particular example, you can see that it's got a mode door motor that has 2 wires going to it inside the actuator assembly. You've got a 3-wire position sensor. And that position sensor really is no different than something like a throttle position sensor, right? As that moves back and forth, it sweeps back and forth, and it's able to put out a signal that gives feedback back to the module of where that door is, right? And of course, those doors can have problems with, well, if we go back one slide, where would you imagine you might see problems with this type of setup, right? Kind of thing you can talk to the students about. Let's see, one of the ones that I've heard frequently are broken stripped gears, right? And you can kind of hear them clicking underneath the dash as they're trying to move things. You can have problems where the doors themselves break inside that they're trying to control. And so this thing can't open and close the door fully because it barely makes a sweep because the mechanism that it's made out of, the plastic or something, has broken inside. All right. If you've got position sensor feedback, you can start to probably see that you're not getting a full range of motion out of it with scan tool data, right? If that's available to you on the car you're working on. Okay. So there's a lot of things that this system, well, let me just say this, right? I'm a big fan of vehicles giving us more and more data. Right. I'm not the kind of guy that gets all worked up about, oh man, there's so much. It's more confusing now than it ever has been. Right. And that is because I'd rather sit in the driver's seat with a scan tool to try to see where problems might crop up on this system, to see, if I've got problems. Move that blend door with the control head and watch your feedback on the scan tool. Use some bidirectional controls maybe and move that back and forth. Okay. For a guy my size with a bad back, it's a lot better than crawling under the dash to look to see if something is moving, right? Anybody else agree with me there?
Yeah, considering you got to take half the dash out to replace these most of the time.
Right. And if I have to do that, I'd rather not do it underneath within my diagnostic time. I'd rather do that as a repair. Right.
Well, I don't want to do it and find out, oops, that wasn't it.
For sure.
Rick,
yes.
This looks like Chrysler, like from a Ram or something.
I think it's a Jeep.
Oh, a Jeep. Okay.
I think
so. It almost looks German, with the.
No, you're right. That's an Audi.
Yeah. Audi.
That's an Audi example. Yep.
I had
that one there is from a Jeep.
A
and
Jeep?
this wiring diagram's from an Audi. Right. They're basically the same system though. Yeah, and that's the other thing too, is we should be able to understand that there's only a few ways to do these things, right? There's only a few ways to have an electric motor move a door. And so the systems are very similar regardless of who made them. That's the cool thing, right?
Well, this Ram I had, it was making strange noises, and it uses 4 of those. Yeah, the worst one was the recirculating door. That was working fine, so it's hard to reach. The others were just right in front of the whole console. So
the ones that are easy to get to weren't broken.
No, they were. They were.
Oh,
broken.
Okay.
They were broken. So I was lucky that one was
okay. I'm not usually that lucky.
So they were making strange noises, but I noticed on the scan tool there was a calibration check. Despite that, they come already calibrated. That's what I read about.
Yeah, so it depends on the manufacturer, right? Most oftentimes, though, they will sweep themselves to learn what's fully open and what's fully closed, right? And that's where broken doors and debris and stuff inside the air duct or the heater case can cause problems, because it can, let's say there was some junk, I don't know, pencil fell down inside the defroster and it got stuck and a door closed against that pencil, right? Now it's going to learn that that is fully closed when there's certainly plenty of air that can sneak by, right?
Yeah.
And it may actually pass all of its tests if it's learned a bad value, right?
Hey, Rick, in the
Yes.
other class, are we gonna get more into these things, these actuators? Because
Yeah, so we're going to basically get into the diagnostic process. I can't say that we're getting into like each and every type of actuator, right? Like the specific electronics in each of them, right? But the process of using them for diagnostics, sure.
yeah, it was interesting. You mentioned the sweep test. I did I think it was a 14 Impala or 15 Impala, and it would make a clicking noise after the car had been sitting for a couple of minutes.
Right.
Everything turned off, and it's actually sweeping those motors. Why they did it then, I don't know, but
Well, maybe because people complained about weird noises while they were in the car, and most oftentimes you'd get out of the car and walk away and never hear it, right?
yeah. It's
Yep.
my niece's car. She thought it was possessed. She'd
Yeah.
walk away
Even-
from it. All of a sudden, it'd make all these clicking noises a couple
Yeah.
minutes later.
I think a GM strategy, Mark, that they started doing back on the pickup trucks when they went electric years ago, was they would open, if it was in recirc, it would open to the outside air after key off, so that the cab would vent when you shut the doors. Otherwise, the doors wouldn't shut with like a normal force. So they would open that recirc door to the outside, so that when you shut the doors, you could blow the cab out.
Yeah, that makes
Otherwise,
sense.
This was a blend door motor on the driver's side.
Okay.
It was
Yeah.
kind of weird.
Yep. So speaking of blend doors, right? What is the job of a blend door? It's to basically introduce warm air to control the temperature, right? Again, it's all about making the temperature whatever the customer wants to make them happy. And if they want a little bit warmer air, they'll introduce some warm air, and you're basically cooling it off and then warming some of it back up. But when it all mixes back together, what you have is slightly cooler air that is drier, right? Because the evaporator also is removing moisture from the system, okay? When this starts to become a problem is not like we're showing you here, but when you're expecting maximum cold air out of that system and some of it is leaking through the heater core, making that final temperature a little bit warmer, right? And this can be because there's something holding the door open. This can be because a cable malfunctioned, a vacuum leak, an actuator problem, a door problem itself internally, right? That can keep this, even seals, right? A lot of doors will have like a little rubber lip or some kind of foam lip, and maybe that has gone away so that the door closes, but air leaks around the door. So some of it's always going through the heater core, right? And this is basically turning into a system that's going to turn into complaints for the customer, right? Okay, now I do want to point out though that I have had complaints from customers that their AC is not working, and I take it for a quick drive and see what's going on. And then, yeah, you're right that, before I've even hooked up anything to it or any tools, that sure doesn't feel, cold to me. And I look over and, the blend switch is not pushed all the way to cold. And I've pushed it all the way to cold, and boom, nice cold air comes out. There, your car's fixed.
Hey, Rick, I got a
Yes.
question for you.
Yeah.
Have you seen, I've actually run into this on an Impala, and I've gone through about 4 Blendor actuators on it in the aftermarket, and the guy is just like fed up, and he's going to go to the, the OE dealer. I mean, is there a parts quality issue in the aftermarket with these Blendor motors or Modor actuators where the dealership's kind of the way to go? Or is that maybe just a a bad batch in your opinion, or what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I haven't necessarily seen that to be the case. I have seen it from time to time. I don't know on that specific example if that's something that I can say that I've said, oh yeah, all the aftermarket ones suck. But it does bring to mind more questions like, what kind of problem was it having? Because the actuator connects to the door, right? And I have seen problems where perfectly good brand new actuators that I put on didn't work right because the door was the problem, right?
Kind of like on the old Taurus models, I think the early Taurus models in the 90s,
Yeah,
early
and we had a
2000s,
bunch
where
of
the door warped.
Ram
Yeah.
trucks where they would break and the door would only move like a quarter of the way, even though the motor moved fully, right? There would be a broken piece inside on the door, and so it wouldn't sweep the door the full amount, right? And so, that what kind of problem is it having that these multiple actuators aren't fixing it?
It just starts clicking. So I mean, everything works fine, and then just a few months down the road, all of a sudden, it gets into that click, click, click,
Yeah.
click, 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 right
And
when the car starts.
that's probably
It's
the
the
door
door.
is messed up and it's too hard to turn,
It's
and
binding
it's
it.
it's stripping the gears out. Yep. So yeah, a brand new factory one's not going to last any longer, I wouldn't imagine.
Awesome. Thanks for the feedback.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, that's the thing I had to learn the hard way too. After putting, I mean, you know what it's like putting an actuator on some of these models, right? And we try to learn the tricks to get in there and do it quicker and easier, and not have to take the whole dash out. And imagine doing all of that, and then you end up with a bad door, right? What we started doing at our shop was telling everybody, look, all of this testing so far has said actuator or door problem. We have to take the actuator off and physically move the door and get a feel for it, right? And they should move really easy by hand, right? Stick something down in there, a little screwdriver or something, move it back and forth, whatever you need to move that. You're going to feel a bad door. That's been my experience. All right, so speaking of blend air, we have to talk about dual zone systems, right? Now, these systems allow for independent control of temperature on each side of the vehicle. One way that can be accomplished is with the addition of basically extra blend doors, which might explain why the one you mentioned earlier had like 4 blend door actuators on it, right? So let me grab my laser pointer again. So we've got, of course, the blower motor, and consider this as 2 independent pathways for the air, where it's split across this evaporator. There's inlet doors, basically, that can open and close and shut off or reduce the airflow through a certain side, right? So with a single blower motor, reducing the volume to one side, we have to basically be able to control, like this is showing, to reduce the airflow through one side if that side of the vehicle requests less air. So we've got that that's been added, and then we've got 2 blend doors now. This particular example shows that we want less air, but we want all of it to be cold. Okay. This example shows we want more air, but we want to be able to kind of split it up with cold air warmed up a little bit with our heater core, right? So we'll get a little blend out of that. So we have more slightly higher temperature air than this side has. Okay. And with those additional doors, we can make that happen. We can have that independent control. Okay. We can control that independently. We may be not wanting any air at all on one side, so we need to be able to shut that completely off, right? So we have this additional doors that can control that. In this case, we want hot air on one side and nothing on the other, and that means we're going to basically run that through the evaporator and then through the heater core. But what we end up with is warmer, dry air, or they may have determined that they didn't even want to run the air conditioning at all at this point, and so they may not circulate any refrigerant through that. Just depends on the system and how they decide to make it work. Okay. Now, there is a somewhat unique problem that can happen on these systems, and we're about to get into our refrigerant overview where we look at each of the components in more detail, and we'll be able to come back around to this to kind of understand. But understand that evaporators fill from the bottom, and the exit is at the top. Okay, which means that we're going to have, you know, the liquid low pressure refrigerant coming in at the bottom of that evaporator. And then as it circulates through, we start evaporating some of it. And it's possible, if the refrigerant charge is low, that we end up with no liquid refrigerant left by the time we hit the airflow section at the top of the evaporator. Okay. And you might end up having a system where we're requesting max cold temperatures out of both sides, yet one side is warmer than the other because there's not enough refrigerant circulating through the system for this to be warm, or for this to absorb heat at the top of the evaporator. Okay, this is more common on dual zone systems, but it can happen on regular single zone AC systems, depending on how the airflow is downstream of the evaporator. Some are set up in such a way that downstream of the evaporator, airflow will start to basically become laminar, and it stays in a certain pathway. And if we peel that air off and send it to one side of the car, and the bottom air gets peeled off and sent to the other side of the car, we can end up with the same thing where one side's warm and the other side's cold from a low refrigerant charge, right? Have you guys run into anything like this before?
Yeah, I've had that happen with non-dual zone cars where half of the cab stays cold and the other doesn't.
Yeah, and some cars will never experience this because the air gets, you know, mixed after it flows through the evaporator, and then, you know, separated to go its different to its different vent destinations. And
yeah, the
then,
one that
then
I
you don't
had,
experience that.
one I had was, it actually was the driver's side that got cold. It wasn't the passenger side, and it was a non-dual system. And it's like, well, that's weird. You would think it'd be the
Yeah,
other way
it's
around.
usually the other way around. In most cars that I've experienced it in a single zone system, it's the passenger side that's cold and the driver's side that's not. And you have to be able to recognize that, because oftentimes these cars are driven by a single individual and they've only brought it in because it's not cold. You know, it's just kind of a clue that leads you towards low refrigerant charge. One of the clues that send you there, right? Dual zone systems, of course, can have, you know, their problems with the blend doors not working, not closing all the way, right? And we've got more of them to deal with. So that's basically is the type of problems you can run into with the dual zone, that add a layer of complexity on top of a single zone system. Okay, and you can't see anything because it's all buried under the dash. All right, so let's dig deeper into the specifics of each of the components in the refrigerant system. Okay, compressors, right? Now, again, we mentioned earlier that the job of the compressor, right, is to take that low pressure vapor and compress it, raising the boiling point, turning it into high pressure vapor, and sending it to the condenser. Okay, but how does that work? How does it do that? What are some of the ways that it can do that? Okay, one of the things that I do like to mention at this point is also that we're going to talk about different ways that it can do it, but from a diagnostic perspective, I'm really less concerned about how it's doing it and more concerned about whether or not it is doing it, right? Because is the compressor faulty or is it not, right? These are the questions that come up. How they work inside is secondary to that, but we do need to understand that there are different ways that it can happen. We've got an example here showing you a cutaway of a swash plate style compressor, right? And we want to point out all the different parts of this system. We've got a clutch, right? And then that clutch is connected to the shaft that goes in to rotate things inside the compressor. That clutch is not always turned on, right? We need to be able to turn it off and on, depending on whether or not we want AC or if we're trying to control something like refrigerant flow. Pulley where we're going to have a drive belt, an electromagnetic clutch that basically, when that is energized, it sucks this metal plate of the clutch over and connects it tightly against the clutch pulley so that it spins the compressor, right? And that allows it to turn off and on and have some control. The swash plate, that's basically a angled plate inside that's connected to the shaft that when things are attached to that plate, they will basically move back and forth as the shaft and the plate rotate. What is connected to those? Pistons. We've got reed valves for intake and exhaust. And think of it as like a little tiny engine, right, of a sort. Okay, and all it's doing is taking in vapor and squeezing it and making it a higher temperature. Okay. Now, this piston arrangement around the swash plate, this particular example that we're showing you here is a 5-piston dual-sided setup. So it's actually a 10-cylinder compressor. And each of those pistons, of course, rides inside a cylinder, and they've got to have seals so that it can, think of it as like piston rings inside of a internal combustion engine. We need to be able to seal off those gases so they don't leak past the pistons. So we've got seals on each of those. And inside here are little bearings. You can see them here on the bench. And so those little bearings allow it to ride on the swash plate with very little friction. Okay, it allows it to stroke those pistons back and forth as this swash plate is turned. Okay, and this swash plate is connected directly to the shaft on this particular example. You'll also see up here at the top, we've got a magnet that's embedded in that, and that allows this compressor to monitor RPM with an RPM sensor. Okay, this set of pistons that is connected around this swash plate allow it to, let's see, where'd you go? Sorry, it stopped responding. There we go. Just had to click in the right spot. That's all it takes sometimes, right? So each of these pistons around that swash plate, and you can kind of see the swash plate kind of sandwiched in right there. It basically allows those pistons to follow. Okay, here's a little video that kind of shows you what I'm talking about. Let me play this. Come on. Not cooperating. You guys ever have that happen in class?
Yes.
Yeah, this one's not cooperating for some
Yeah,
reason.
the video ran in the PowerPoint deck. I've seen.
Did it?
It did.
Was it running for you? Okay.
Yeah, most of the videos you've shown I haven't seen them on my side, but I
Oh, that's right.
assume they work.
Because yeah, never mind. It's playing in the PowerPoint, which I'm not sharing with you because I'm sharing PowerPoint presenter view, right? So you can see all the notes and stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
So basically, it's hooked up to a drill, right? The drill turns the shaft. It's partially assembled. Basically, the heads are off of each end of the compressor, and you can see all of the pistons stroking back and forth inside there. So kind of gives them that visual of what we've been talking about. Now, how do we control what comes in and leaves? That's with reed valves. So these reed valves, we've got inlet and outlet reed valves. The inlet reed valves are very thin pieces of spring steel that just basically having a difference in pressure as a piston drops down. It lowers the pressure inside that particular cylinder. And then basically the reed valve opens because the pressure outside is higher. And so refrigerant vapor flows into that. And then when the piston starts to go back up, this valve will shut. Now we have to compress it, and we do that by forcing it out past a much stronger spring steel valve. And so to overcome that, the pressure increases before it squirts out around that reed valve. Okay.
Hey, Rick,
Yes.
if that reed valve on the previous slide you were showing, if one of those breaks, will the low side pressure fluctuate? Will the gauge sit there and do this?
So you'll get a little bit of that, because as that piston goes back up, it's basically pushing gas back out into the low side. So you will see some fluctuation in that needle, right? And most likely you're going to have noise associated with that too, because where did that reed valve go, right? It's probably destroyed a bunch of other stuff at that point, right? So here's the thing with my real world experience with this is it's exceedingly rare that you're going to get something in the shop where that valve just broke and you see that happen. What's more likely is the thing has been grinding itself for the last few days at the very least before the customer brings it into you. And now what do you end up with? You have a compressor that's not doing anything anymore because it's basically just destroyed itself internally, right?
Had an excursion, a guy brought me, and the gauge would sit there on the low side and do this. Wasn't getting much cooling out of it. And they ended up, it was actually Joe Sontag's kid, and he fixed it in school. He was in tech school, but they put all new system in. I never saw the compressor apart, so I was assuming that's what it was.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, what are some things that can cause fluctuations on the low side? Well, depends. Is it doing that, like really fast fluctuations, or just kind of, up and down like that? Because that compressor is going way faster than that, right? Okay. So, I mean, I would expect, it would be vibrating vigorously, right, with something like this because of the speed, and the vibration would increase as you increase the RPM of the compressor, right? Kind of a methodical thing back and forth might be like, I don't know, a sticky TXV valve, and it's just kind of opening and closing, right? And getting stuck partway through. Okay.
Okay.
All right. All right. Now, what other types of compressors are there? Well, there's a lot, right? Here's an example of a scroll type compressor. And this little line drawing in the bottom just will play automatically. It's like a little GIF, and it'll basically just swirl like this to kind of show you, and you'll be able to show them the differences between the outside scroll moving and the inside scroll staying stationary, right? So this is the inside scroll, it stays put. The outer scroll, which is this one, which is basically backwards, it'll insert down inside that other one, basically just moves around like this in a little offset circle, right? And what that does is allow gases to enter in, and then as the circles get tighter and tighter and tighter at the middle, we end up leaving through this outlet hole, and there's a single reed valve on the other side of that hole. That same thing, a very strong spring steel spring on that reed valve, and so once the pressure builds up, it can basically push the gases past that valve. These are a lot more efficient. These are a lot quieter than ones that use pistons. They are more expensive to manufacture, but manufacturers, nobody says this is the only way to make a compressor for an AC system, right? We used to make them with 2 pistons, right, with actual piston rings and a crankshaft. Okay, we had Yorks and Tecumsehs and the V twins on the Chryslers, right? They've changed over the years, but their job has not. Okay.
Yeah, I had a 70s Duster that had that V twin York. It blew icicles out the vents, but it also slowed the car down when it slipped on it
substantially. Yeah. And that is really the main thing, and it's a great conversation starter to talk about the designs, is that the designs are really there to make it rob less horsepower, to be more efficient. Okay, that's kind of why we've seen this change and evolution of compressor design over the years. Is, I mean, you don't want to take 30 horsepower away from something, if you don't have to, right? If it can take a few horsepower, single digits, that's way better. Because what is that horsepower? That parasitic draw, that parasitic load, right? That's extra fuel we have to burn that doesn't do anything for us. That's extra emissions that have to go out the tailpipe, right? Just to make us cool. And, with all the regulations, you can't really do that anymore. So we're looking for incremental little bits and pieces everywhere all over the car. Okay. Now, other compressors may actually be able to change their displacement. And this actually allows for control of the flow through the evaporator by just changing how much pumping we get out of the compressor. We'll get into this in more detail coming up, but this compressor allows us to change the stroke of the pistons. And that stroke, you'll notice here the swash plate, which is just like the one we showed you earlier. Here it is at an angle, but that angle can be changed, unlike the example we showed you earlier, right? And when we change that from a sharp angle to no angle, then the pistons that are surrounding the swash plate never stroke. With no angle, they just sit still and the swash plate turns. So when that is happening, we don't have any flow of refrigerant itself. Okay. And so that allows compressors like this one to not have a clutch. It just spins all the time without any on or off. It's just infinitely controlled between no pumping and max pumping, depending on what the system requires. Okay. And like I said, we'll dig into that one a little more deeper. Yeah. Question?
Yeah.
Who does no clutch? Because I remember the GM V5s and V7s, they were all clutched.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I never
this is
seen those on
this is
clutch.
a Volkswagen and Audi cutaway.
Yeah, my 06 Jetta has this compressor on it.
Mhm.
Really? So it's
where there's no
basically-
clutch.
Okay.
And it
if
actually
it's-
runs the lowest at about 3% duty cycle on that solenoid, and it never maxes out at 100. It goes to like 95, 96% duty cycle. So it's always on.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's
But if
what
you
I'm
wanna
thinking.
shut
If
the-
it's on all the time, it doesn't need a clutch.
Right.
Right.
Well,
Yeah, so the
does that
duty
solenoid
cycle-
shut off?
What's
Does
that?
that solenoid ever shut off to shut the flow of refrigerant totally off to it?
So the way it works, right, is this allows low pressure to bleed through the valve and get behind this swash plate piston to force it over. And so you don't need 100% duty cycle to get enough pressure to cause zero pumping, right? That's why there's not a 100% direct correlation between duty cycle of the solenoid and the amount of pumping. And that's why it doesn't need to go to 100%, right? This is a normally open valve. So a higher duty cycle will turn into more pumping, right? And the lower duty cycle will give us less pumping.
Rick, while you had your pointer, is that the other side of the piston?
Yeah, the backside.
So over here is where we control it, right? You notice that this is yellow.
Yeah.
This is green, right? So this green is actually low pressure refrigerant, right? And this is lower than low pressure refrigerant. And when there's less pressure, then this basically allows that angle to swing back. It allows the piston to move back. And when we we control the pressure that gets behind it, we can then change the angle. And that happens here with this solenoid.
Oh.
Okay. Yeah,
got
I have
pressure on
some
both
better
sides.
pictures to kind of show you with arrows pointing to all the cool stuff.
Hey,
coming
Rick.
up. Yeah.
Another question. On any of these compressors, do they have an internal pressure regulating valve built into them?
I think there's a few older VV VD variable displacement compressors that were like strictly mechanical, right? So they would use differential and pressure to change the angle. So, but that was just basically a pressure regulating valve basically inside that took
Yeah,
care of
that's
that.
the old GMs, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yes.
the old GM V5s, it was done on pressure.
Yep.
Oh, so theoretically, if they lose power to the solenoid, it goes to minimum displacement.
Correct.
Ah.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely.
And if they run out of oil internally and that shaft seizes, it takes out the belt. So
Actually, there's a breakaway on the clutch.
is there a breakaway? Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
there's a rubber.
it deforms and allows
Okay.
it to just to spin.
So it can still spin the pulley without
Right.
the drive shaft locking up. That's good. That's good.
Yeah, it's usually associated with a noise of some kind that then goes away.
Okay.
If they happen to catch it, right?
Breaks loose and then quiets
Yeah.
down.
So
Yeah, that screaming noise is the customer when he gets the bill.
yeah, no kidding. So electrical control is kind of the next little mini section we have, and just pointing out some of the early systems that didn't have compressor clutches at all, that they ran the compressor all the time, right? I was mentioning some of the stuff from the early days. This one blows air conditioned air through the back. All of this stuff was mounted in the trunk, except for the compressor, which was up there all the time, right? But we got away from that early on and we went to something like this. And this is a video that'll play that basically we're just commanding the compressor off and on. So you can see that sometimes it turns and sometimes it doesn't, depending on the condition, right? This allows systems like orifice tube systems to control the flow of refrigerant. Okay, this is one of the methods you can use, is by basically cycling the compressor off and on to get the correct amount of refrigerant flow. This can also be the main control for the system. When I want AC, I turn the compressor on. When I don't, I make sure it's off. Oftentimes when it's coming to us with problems, and we get to the point where we understand that it's not turning on at all, we have to start looking at the ways that a car can control this system, right? And so again, in this fundamentals class, we just want to give them some examples of some of the things that they might see out there in the field, right? And so a lot of what this comes down to is just being able to understand wiring diagrams to see how this magnetic clutch for the AC compressor is controlled on the particular vehicle we've got, right? This particular one here, we've got a relay that's involved, right? And so that relay, when it's on, sends power to the clutch and it is grounded all the time. So it should turn on, right? We ask them a question at this point is, right, can you see 4 different ways to control this clutch on this particular system? And maybe control isn't the exact word we need to use, right? What are ways that can inhibit the magnetic clutch from working, right? That's often what we're confronted with. Hey, it's not on. Oh, it must be out of refrigerant. Well, no, let's not jump to that conclusion, right? Let's sit down for a minute with the wiring diagram and look at all of the ways that could keep this from coming on and see if there's some quick and easy things we can look at to see why it's not working, right? And so they should be able to identify that there's actually a switch on the HVAC control module, right? There's a high pressure cutout switch that if the AC pressure was too high or that switch was faulty or its circuits were faulty, it would not turn on. We have a low pressure switch and a cycling switch, all of which could inhibit it from working. In addition to fuses that aren't working, right? So if we had fuses upstream here, right, or faulty relays, or the magnetic clutch itself being bad, right? There's the process is we first need to understand all of the things that can keep it from working, and then what are the quickest ways to go about verifying which one is the one that's turning it off, right? Maybe I would look at scan tool data and look to see if my pressure switches are giving me any feedback. Okay. maybe all of a sudden I see, oh, high pressure is showing 600 PSI. The thing is sitting there, it's not even on. I'm going to be looking at that a lot closer, and that's where I'll direct my attention. Okay. So that's just the baseline, right? The fundamental approach that we take, regardless of what we're working on. That's how we want to approach it. Okay. Now let's talk about the condenser itself, right? What does it do? How does it do it? What are some of the different things that you would expect? Right. Well, we start off by taking low pressure vapor into the compressor. We saw how that worked internally, all the different ways that it can work, and we raise that pressure and move that refrigerant through the system, and that raises the boiling point so that we can send that high pressure gas to the condenser. We then cool off the refrigerant and take the heat out of the refrigerant into the air, right? And then that condenses it into a high pressure liquid. That comes along with temperatures that we can see as well, right? We've got around 180 degrees, and these are flexible. These are conditional. These are going to change depending on the vehicle, the temperature outside, the humidity, all of those things are going to change. But just for reference, to see the change from one side of the condenser to the other, right? We might look for something like a 30-degree change in temperature between inlet and outlet to indicate that it has absorbed that much heat from the refrigerant into the outside air. Okay. Now, what allows that process to happen on almost every car? It's going to be a transfer of heat that requires some air to be moving in order to transfer the heat. Okay, and so that airflow across the condenser is controlled by a fan. We can have belt-driven fans, we can have electric fans, and in some cases, hydraulic fans. Okay. And of course, there's a video here showing us commanding a fan off and on this particular model. And we can turn it on and you'll see the fan coming on and turning back off. And if you've got a problem where you don't have the heat transfer like you want, that's going to reduce the effectiveness of its ability to absorb heat inside the interior of the vehicle. And that could correlate to a fan that's not moving enough air across the condenser. Okay.
Rick, I got a question.
Yeah.
Is there a correlation on the high side, at the condenser between temperature and pressure? Like we talk about on the low side, if it gets down to 38, you could probably see close to 38 degrees somewhere in that evaporator.
Right.
Is that same correlation work?
Yeah,
on
I
the
mean,
high
pressure, temperature, with R134 is very consistent. I think I've got a chart here. Let me look.
Because it's not unusual for us in the summertime to see high pressures in the 250s, 260, 280 range. Yeah,
right.
300. I think that would be one of those things that if a condenser's,
Yeah, so if we had, no, that's fine.
Program.
If we had like 180 PSI or 180 degrees, that would correlate to 390 PSI.
Okay.
I've seen that.
I've never seen
they
it.
They don't work very good when they're that high, and they usually start to kick off because that high pressure comes into play. So I don't know if it's exactly or not, right? And it also may have to do with my ability to measure accurately the temperature of the refrigerant inside the hose, inside the pipe, right? And is it the same as the temperature outside where the line goes in? So I would say there's probably something, closer to, I'm not accurately measuring the temperature if I look for that. So what do you guys see for high side pressures?
Like 250 to 300, depends on the outside air temp and the humidity.
Right.
Yeah. And how often that fan is cycling, but like on clutch fan vehicles where that fan would not engage very well.
Right.
Mechanically, they'd start to blow off at about 425 to 450 through the mechanical release valve.
Yeah.
Overcharge, Yeah.
You bet. All right. So I wonder if we might be able to take a quick break for
Yeah.
a bathroom run, if that wouldn't be okay with you guys. So why don't we get back here at like top of the hour, 10-minute quick break? Does that
That'll
work for
work.
you? All right. Sounds good.
Yeah.
I'll see you in a few.
All right.
Coffee's running through me. Welcome back. I think you're muted.
Yeah.
Decided
Have you
to
ever
bring a
changed
student
those
class with me.
blend door modules on an F-150?
F-150.
Yeah, like maybe 2015-ish. There's one all the way on the bottom that controls the driver's blend door. And
I
that
haven't done that
whole
one yet.
that whole heater box has to come out to change it.
Oh,
Yep. It's crazy.
I remember we came up with a way on Crown Vics and town cars and Grand Marquis. There's one blend door.
yeah.
On
at the
top.
Mhm.
Yeah. So what we would do is cut away a little square of the insulation that's right above it. Take one screw out, bust the ear off, pull it out, take the screw and turn it about 1/8 of a turn, take the new blend door actuator and take the ear and snip it so you could slide it under the screw, drop it in, put the second screw in and ship it. Oh,
Yeah.
put the little piece of insulation back in. Yeah, well, and that's why I have so many scars all over my arm, right? It's weird in the summertime when I start to get a little color from being outside, the scars don't tan.
No.
My arms are a mess. You can't even tell, until the tan starts coming.
It's like changing a window.
Yeah, I brought a student to class with me, so, see if you guys can learn or anything.
All right. That means we
Actually, I
have
gotta
to,
turn her back in
no
sooner.
cursing.
No, I gotta give her back to mom. She's not gonna put up with grandpa too long.
Yep. Tim is back. Are you just now getting back, Tim? Or have you been back? I haven't looked over at that screen for a while.
No, I popped in right as you went to break.
Oh, perfect timing.
Almost
did
like
your-
I planned it.
How did your thing go?
Oh, it was good.
Oh, good.
That vision show, that Sherry Hamilton really knows what she's doing. She does a good
Runs a
show.
tight ship.
Yep.
Definitely a tight ship.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was not left with the impression that's this is the first time they're doing any of this stuff either,
Yeah.
like they were
Oh, yeah.
naturals at it already.
Yep.
We're like professionals.
Yeah.
Mm,
Which
yeah.
is, it's an illusion. They are making this up as they go along, but they're doing a pretty convincing imitation of skill and experience.
Yep, for sure.
I guess so with the whole virtual thing. That's true. Yeah, it's the normal show they run really well, but yeah, this virtual deal's got to be a headache.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Platform they're using is pretty slick though.
Okay,
Yeah, it's interesting.
which one is it?
I cannot remember the name of it now. It's some web hosting service. I can't remember the name of it at the moment.
And
I can't either.
I was just on it.
Yes.
StreamYard.
StreamYard, that's it.
That's just, it's interesting because StreamYard is just the trainer interface.
Yeah.
And then the attendees are going through a different program. They're going through an app, an actual
That's right.
branded app.
Yeah, because when we're teaching, we have to be on StreamYard, and then for the chat, we have to have the app open at the same time for the chat function.
Yep.
All right. Well, let's get back to it. Condenser design has changed over the years. It started off as a very simple heat exchanger, basically a tube that had a bunch of fins welded to it. And to make it a little more compact, it was kind of arranged in a serpentine fashion. The big thing about these was that you had one single pathway in and all the way through to the end, which had the advantage of being able to be cleaned and reused, the disadvantage, less efficiency, right? But, this is, the days of R12, and these systems, they had a little more headroom, I would say, with R12. They could get away with stuff. Also, vehicles were bigger, and they could make these condensers a lot bigger and offset that efficiency, right? They were less concerned with how heavy they were. So all of this like we talked about with compressors, trying to make things more efficient, we need to make these more efficient. And this was really the first place that efficiency became important when we transitioned to R134A. These systems were not keeping up. And, you know, one thing that you can bring up at this point too is flushing, and, you know, how it's not really the thing to do anymore, right? It was very common to clean and reuse or flush out and reuse components back in the day. But we're going to talk in a second about how the design of the condensers has changed to the point that you can't clean them anymore and be assured that you got everything cleaned out. And the fact that most of the components on the system can't really be cleaned out. So that's another reason AC jobs are getting more expensive. One of the first things they went to was to just kind of take that tube that was circulating and flatten it to increase its surface area, and got better heat transfer from the refrigerant to the outside air in a condenser. But in order to make this work, they had to basically put a lot of individual passageways inside that tube, which turned into places that could retain debris even after you flushed it and everything was coming out clean and you assumed everything was okay. And so this is really when the days of flushing condensers went away, and it all has to do with the design. And to increase surface exposure between refrigerant and air, we have to go to smaller and smaller passageways to make this work. And we also can change these designs to basically filling up the entire side of a condenser and then just going across the condenser in a parallel configuration. There you can certainly see that if we tried to send some type of flush solvent through, it could come in and go across half the condenser and then leave and be nice and clean, and you think you got everything cleaned up, and there could be a bunch of junk sitting down here in the bottom. That, of course, what's it going to do? It's going to break free and start circulating after the customer has taken that vehicle back, and you got to come back on your hands, and you're going to have to spend some real money getting that thing fixed. Okay. It's very common that few components can be reused these days. And that's just the nature of this system. Okay. But the job of the condenser has not changed. It does the same job. We're just able to do it with a smaller, more compact, lighter weight system that ultimately allows us to get the same cooling effect with less and less refrigerant. I mean, think back to the olden days of, let's see, the biggest system I think I've personally worked on was an R12 Suburban dual AC, front and rear. I think it took 6 pounds,
Yeah.
6.5 pounds of R12, right? You literally have vehicles now with less than a pound in them, right?
Hey, Rick, real quick question, because you guys are going to see more of that than we do, but like when you're on Rock Auto and you're looking at the parts nowadays, there's a lot of offshore stuff.
Mm-hmm.
One of the ones I see real common is GPD, compressors, condensers. Have you guys seen good luck, bad luck? I mean,
personally, I've never bought one from Rock Auto. You know, we had to get to the point where with these systems, we went with a local parts store that would sell us quality stuff and allow us to make a labor claim if their stuff failed. Right. So yeah, we probably spent more money on it that way, but there was that incentive for everybody to do a good job and to get you the right stuff, and for them to stop carrying stuff that wasn't working because it was costing them a lot of money. So
yeah, because some of this stuff's pretty cheap nowadays, you know, comparatively.
Yeah, and so I mean, then that becomes the shop's responsibility to take the hit, right? Sure, somebody like Rock Auto might take the parts back if there was a failure, but man, I don't want to deal with that.
Yeah, a
And if
lot
you're
of times you don't
making a
even know
lot
if
more
it comes with
money,
oil.
oh yeah, that's the other thing too,
They don't
right?
say. They don't say if it comes with oil or not.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
most
is
of
it
the
the
time,
right oil?
yeah, most of the time the compressor comes full of oil and you don't know how much you're supposed to put in because they say, you know, whatever you took out, you didn't take anything out. So now it's a big
Because
guessing game.
the thing blew a hose and there wasn't any oil left, right?
Right.
Yeah, so you're starting from scratch. Yeah, when it comes to that stuff, I prefer good quality brand name stuff. You know, same OE manufacturer, but through the aftermarket is probably your cheapest alternative for good stuff. I've also run into a situation where, speaking of condensers, somebody put an aftermarket condenser in that was a smaller, more efficient design. Great, fantastic. Put the same charge of refrigerant in. Now it's overcharged, you know? And there was probably some packing material that came with the condenser that said to adjust the charge, or here's a new sticker for you to put on. But where did that end up?
Oh,
With
come
all
on,
the
nobody
other
reads that.
with all the other packing material that, yeah,
It's
I don't
stuck
call
to
it an
the
instruction.
technician's shoe.
Yeah, there it is. Absolutely. All right. Now, the receiver dryer, we mentioned this when we were going through our overview of the refrigerant system. As refrigerant leaves that condenser, it may still have some gas or vapor refrigerant with it, right? And so we want to make sure none of that gets to the thermal expansion valve. So part of the design of a receiver dryer is to separate out any potential vapor. And so only liquid gets drawn past that point. And they do that by having a pickup on the bottom where liquid would settle to the bottom. And that's where you pick up to be able to send downstream. Now, what else is in here? Well, we've got a filter that's inside of there that'll keep the big chunks out. We've got a desiccant in there. That desiccant is there for several reasons, right? One is to absorb moisture, and you know how good of a job that does depends on what kind of conditions you install it under, right? How long has it been exposed? How long did it was it exposed to high humid conditions out there before it was actually put in the vehicle? Now, this is a picture of one that actually can be replaced separately. Some systems are put together in such a way that you can actually replace the desiccant. You can see on the previous picture, right? There's the plug, right? And the desiccant that would slide up inside that receiver dryer, because it's not separate from the condenser, it's built onto the condenser, right?
Mark Isaac, you see that? That'd come right out, wouldn't it?
Never does that thing come out.
No, and that's that's a good point to
Tell the
make. Is
condenser.
that
Yep.
one, yes, it can, but does it get replaced separately, right?
Do the whole condenser.
No, it gets
the
a new
aluminum will
condenser.
corrode around it.
Well, see, that's not my problem. My problem is the only reason I would want to go in there is if it got too much and the desiccant wasn't controlling the moisture anymore, right? If that happened, an evacuation would probably help that out enough to get it back down the road. If it needed to be replaced because it's got a bunch of junk stuck in it, well, there's no way I'm not replacing the condenser, right? And where did all the junk come from? It's probably going to need a whole system at that point, right? So yeah, this is something we can show them that's out there. It's possible. It is a design feature that is universally never used. I don't know of a single tech that has ever put one in, unless he was at the dealer, right? And maybe they had something that they had to do when these were practically brand new, right? That's not my customer that I'm teaching. What about you guys? You guys teaching guys that are working on brand new stuff?
That hex turns into a circle real fast.
Yeah, it does.
That plastic plug, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the first thing you see around here is those bottom fins are all white, about 4 rows up.
They're all rotted away.
So that brings up another thing, right? What happens to the efficiency of these condensers if the bottom half of the condenser, the fins are no longer in contact with the tubes? because they all rotted away, right? So that's something I don't deal with personally, but it will happen in different parts of the country where they salt the roads, right?
Oh, yeah.
So Rick, question for you, because my experience on the Euro side, that was their deal. Anytime that system was opened, it got a new dryer. That's the way I was taught to do it. And yeah, we ran some of these as well. The caps were aluminum, and sometimes the whole assembly would tear off the condenser. Every now and then we could get them loose, but not very often. So is that just not something out there to, if the system's open? I don't know. I haven't looked into many AC systems other than, my Euro experience.
Right. Yeah. So in the real world shop environment that I worked in, right? If a system was open, it wasn't going to be open for very long. If it was, we would cap it off. We also don't have very high humidity here, right? We have a rainy season in the summer, and that is the only time we have to really deal with it, but we're still dealing with 50% humidity max, maybe 40, right? Right now I'm running about 20% humidity here in Tucson, right? So we don't really see them getting hurt from environmental conditions, right? Nothing that can't be overcome with a good long evacuation when we put it back together, okay? Although I will say desiccants are difficult to get the moisture back out of without the introduction of temperature, right? So, you're not going to get a lot of it out unless this thing's really warm when you're trying to do that, okay?
Yeah, see, I guess that would be my question in different parts of the country. Like I'm in Atlanta, and we're doing a lot of AC work in the summer. We're 100% humidity, so technically how long do you have before you run into that situation where, that desiccant has absorbed so much moisture to the point where you're not going to get it out with a normal, evac.
Right. So let's say it's not even an AC problem. You just have to take it apart to get to something else. You gotta evacuate and charge and disconnect to get the radiator out. That's a fairly common thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Take it apart, cap the lines to the hoses and to the condenser, do your work, put it all back together, hook it back up, evacuate it for an hour, right? Half hour, whatever you guys feel comfortable with. I do not see that being a problem at all, right? Leaving all the lines hanging open, especially those that are, exposing that to 90% humidity is a bad idea. Then you got to consider putting another one in.
Okay,
right?
thank you.
Controlling conditions, I think, really is the big thing, right? Now, when one shows up and you have no idea from the body shop, and you have no idea now how long that sucker was apart because they had to put a front, clip on it. That's a different story. You guys get much of that body shop work?
What I see a lot of times in the spring is the people that slid off the road during our icy winters took out some of the front fascia, and then when it's all the dirty snowbanks melt and you got all the rocks on the road, now the condensers are getting shots to them. And they're driving around with a leak or whatever.
Right.
You can end up changing the whole thing anyway, but.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So quite often it's the multiple items getting replaced for problems like that. All right. So the probably the biggest job of that receiver dryer is to make sure we don't have any moisture in the system. And that's because once that leaves the receiver dryer, it heads to the thermal expansion valve, right? And that temperature drop that we talked about where it goes from high pressure liquid to low pressure liquid can basically get very close, if not go lower than the freezing point of water. And moisture in that refrigerant that's circulating with the refrigerant will tend to freeze at that point. And that point is going to be where the regulated orifice is in something like an expansion valve or in an orifice tube, right? That's where a lot of that happens. Anytime there's a restriction and you get that change in temperature, that can happen. And that can be anywhere in the system, say if there was a malfunction and there was a bunch of debris. That's the big reason for the expansion valve, for the receiver dryer. But how do these things work? What is their job? Their job is to regulate flow through the evaporator. The more hot air that we're trying to absorb the heat from, the more refrigerant I need flowing through the evaporator. And it's a balancing act to be able to get that to work just right. So we need to have a way to control that. One way is with an expansion valve that can vary the size to vary the amount of refrigerant that flows through. Okay, this works by having a movable valve inside that when it moves, it can open or close an orifice down, right? And so that allows us to control how much goes through. I'll have a better picture with an H block here in a second to kind of show you what's going on inside. But it has to sense what's happening in the evaporator to be able to control this, right? Because that's what its job is, right? And the way we do that is by connecting it basically with the outlet of the evaporator, right? So you can see here that we've got high pressure liquid coming in. We've got a small orifice there that lets some through. So we've got low pressure now, still liquid, leaving that expansion valve. And then as it travels through the evaporator, it starts to evaporate and turns into a low pressure gas, right? Well, if we connect those together so that we can sense what's happening on the outlet of the evaporator, we can use that to control how much flow we have going through that expansion valve. Traditionally, the way that is done is with what's known as a capillary tube and a bulb, right? This is not a connection to the actual gas leaving, but it's basically connected to the outside, the outlet pipe, so it can sense the temperature of what this gas is at that point. And when the temperature is higher, it's going to basically expand all of the fluid that's inside of this and push the valve open further, letting more refrigerant flow. And when it gets colder, it will condense and this valve will close, reducing the amount of flow. And so we've got like a mechanical action going on here that allows us to control that flow. Now, if we look inside of an H block, this cutaway here is a little better to show you how that works. We have high pressure liquid coming in from the condenser, and you can see that there's a slight orifice right here with a ball, basically a ball and a seat, that when that ball is further down, more refrigerant can flow, and when that ball is up, less can flow. And in fact, it can close all the way too. And inside here is the liquid that can expand and contract. Now, this particular one, instead of being connected via a capillary tube and a bulb, they basically incorporate that into the outlet flow of the evaporator, and it all happens inside this one valve. And so when this expands, it from heat, it pushes that valve down and lets more refrigerant flow through into the evaporator. And when we get more flow, the temperature will drop and this will close, and it basically becomes self-regulating. And this is right here where the water can freeze if it's present in the system. Okay. Now, orifice tubes work on a different method because they've got the same size orifice all the time. So we have to control the flow of refrigerant in a different manner, right? And the way we do that is by sending refrigerant through and measuring pressure or temperature to be able to cycle that compressor off and on. Okay, so we'll basically run the compressor, we'll send a bunch of refrigerant through the evaporator, we'll measure the temperature or the pressure as it leaves, and because the pressure and the temperature go hand in hand with each other, it allows us to be able to regulate how much goes through. Now, this system also works on the premise that they're going to run more refrigerant in the evaporator than a thermal expansion valve system would. They're going to flood the evaporator with more refrigerant in order for the system to function. Riding that perfect line of the perfect flow of refrigerant is difficult with a compressor that all we're doing is grossly turning it off and on. And what you would end up is these wild temperature swings if we had just a perfect amount of refrigerant flow, or attempted to have a perfect amount of refrigerant flow in the evaporator. So we have more refrigerant than we need. Because of that, we're likely to have liquid refrigerant still left over once it's left the evaporator. And that's where we need to separate that out inside the accumulator. Okay. Now,
Hey, Rick,
yes.
real quick, I just thought of something.
Yeah.
So I've got to come from a European background as well,
Sure.
just like Ryan. And it's been a long time since I've seen a capillary tube and a bulb on a vehicle. Most of them have gone, you know, the majority of my experience has been H block and
right
orifice tube. Are the domestics or the Asians still using that technology, or have they kind of
I'm still
gotten away
seeing
from
it in the Asian market.
Yeah,
right?
Asians still do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Domestics have mostly gone to H block, which is the same thing, basically.
Right.
You know,
Yeah, Honda is
domestics
using
tried
that
all
bulb
kinds.
for a long time.
What's that?
Honda used that bulb for a long
sure.
time because it's,
Yeah.
and so does Toyota.
Mhm.
It's stuck right in the evaporator.
Yep.
Okay.
You know, the domestics tried all kinds of other stuff too, way back in the day, right?
TXV.
Well, let's see, we had POA, right?
We had VIR.
Yes,
VIR
VIR.
systems.
Yeah.
Those.
Yeah, all kinds of funny stuff that luckily we're not going to get into in this class. Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. That's the old tech. I did put some old tech stuff in here for us old timers, and when they reviewed my slides, they said, that's old, get that out of here. So all right, so this is controlling this evaporator flow quite often with a pressure sensor on the accumulator side of the system, right? And what they'll do is basically regulate pressure. And if it gets too low, they know that there's way too much refrigerant. So then they'll stop the flow for a while, turn the compressor off, okay? And then continue on once that temperature has risen a little bit and the pressure has risen. So that's the simple basic CCOT, or cycling clutch orifice tube system, right? There's no reason that we can't incorporate an orifice tube and a variable displacement compressor. There's no reason that we can't, put a TXV system and a variable displacement compressor. There's different ways to do this, right? And different manufacturers will use different things. But one thing that will always hold true is that the refrigerant storage device, if you will, that liquid gas separator will be on one side or the other, depending on the type of orifice that it's using. Okay. With a straight up orifice tube that does not vary in size, we are going to be separating out any liquid on the outlet of the evaporator. On a TXV, we're going to be separating out any gas before it gets to the TXV. Okay. Now we should mention that with orifice tubes, they do have different sizes. It's not one size fits all. That you need to make sure you're putting the right one in the car. They're color coded for the most part to try to alleviate any of those types of problems. It's rare, but it does happen sometimes that somebody else put the wrong one in for you. And you try to match it up, and the one the parts store sent you is a different color. That's where you need to do some of your research and see which one it's supposed to have, and double check before you install it. Okay. Now, where are these orifice tubes in these systems? Your best bet is to look for a tube entering the evaporator that will have a crimp or a dimple in it, right? And this is usually the sign that you've got an orifice tube in that area. And you can find these in a line. You can find these in the evaporator itself. In this particular case, the orifice tube basically goes into the inlet of the evaporator on this Ranger, I believe. Sometimes you're going to find that this crimp is somewhere in the middle of the liquid line. And I will be honest with you, my recommendation is to replace the entire line but you know, it's worth noting that there are repair kits out there that will have you cut and shorten the line basically and install a kit that supposedly will never leak, that you can replace the orifice tube without replacing the line. I feel it's cheap insurance to replace the entire line. I feel that you're creating extra places for leaks, and I've seen them leak, right? Do you guys have any experience with these types of kits?
Yeah, the line has to be almost perfect to
Right.
maintain that seal. Yeah.
And we get corrosion on the outside of the lines, and those ferrules just don't want to seal sometimes.
Yeah. And I
Because
was
they're
going to
pitted.
say, it's probably, I've seen them leak enough times I won't use them, and the lines are pretty pristine where I live, right? I can
I've
imagine
seen-
you guys probably can't even get them out the door without them leaking, right?
What I've run into on some of these, when the compressor guts are stuck in that orifice tube, you'll get the tube out after fighting it, but then there's just a big clog upstream of that if there's a bend or somewhere in there, you're never going to get that out.
Yeah.
Just put a line on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I've seen that very thing happen as well, right? Especially where'd all that crap come from? That's bits of the compressor that's made it through the condenser before it got there, right? Man, what doesn't need to get replaced at this point, right? And then downstream of our orifice tube or our expansion valve is going to be an evaporator, right? And I tried a couple times to give you guys a different picture of an evaporator, and they're like, "Hey, man, that's a condenser," and it wasn't. It was an evaporator, and the point being, evaporators basically followed the same evolution as condensers and became more efficient and therefore unable to be cleaned. There was a long period of time where we had continued to have like tube and fin style evaporators, that it was very common to compressor blows up, it gets a compressor, it gets a condenser, it gets any line that's got a muffler in it, and it gets the rest of the stuff flushed, right? And of course, evaporator, a thermal expansion valve, and a receiver dryer or an accumulator. Now that's gone, right? The evaporators are basically made and they look exactly like condensers. Very efficient, parallel flow, multiple pathways, tiny little passageways. And these suckers do a really good job without much refrigerant, but that means they're not reusable. When it comes to R1234YF systems, we've got an extra layer that gets added in with the evaporators, and that is that many manufacturers that have gone to R1234YF are using the exact same components as their R134, and that's why it's popular. It's not requiring a complete re-engineering of the AC system, right? But because of its slight flammability, they have to certify that the evaporator, which is in the interior of the vehicle, is certified for use with 1234YF. That's why if you open one up and replace, you can't put a used evaporator in. You can't use an evaporator that, even though it's exactly the same, is an R134 evaporator, because it's not been certified. So just adding more fun to all of our jobs, right, when we're trying to fix these cars. Now, these systems will fill from the bottom and empty from the top. This particular example here shows that pretty clearly, that when it's mounted in its normal configuration, the liquid low pressure refrigerant goes in at the bottom, right? Comes in over here from an H block, and follows down and fills up from the bottom. And then as it rises, it becomes gaseous as it's absorbing that heat. And it's just like the jar, and it's just like the can of air, right? That process happens inside this evaporator. And then we've got vapor at the top, and that leaves and goes out and goes back through the H block on the other side, okay? With orifice tube systems, we have to have the accumulator not allow any liquid refrigerant passed. So in this case, if we've got gas mixed with liquid refrigerant, it settles to the bottom, but we only draw off of the top to be able to send that forward, right? up to the compressor. What happens if we send liquid refrigerant into a compressor? It can start doing some damage, bending or breaking reed valves, causing mechanical damage. It's almost like hydrolocking an engine, right? Okay. Now, flow control with something like this system will often use a pressure switch. And as that pressure drops, it will turn off the compressor, right? To see how that works, we got to get a wiring diagram back into play, right? So on this one, you can see that we've got that cycling switch there that when it opens at lower pressures, it cuts off power to that AC clutch. So it turns it off. It's a very simple system. It is monitored, however, by this PCM, and you can ask your students why you think they would need to know at that point why it would need to monitor. Well, it's going to be comparing that to temperatures in the evaporator to see if the pressure is being controlled in a way that controls the temperature. We measure those temperatures in the evaporator in a number of ways. We can have a temperature sensor that measures the airflow right as it exits the evaporator, like the one you see there on the left, and you can have one that's actually inserted into the vanes of the evaporator to be able to more directly measure the temperature there as well. This is also something that's used in its calculations of whether or not it should increase flow or not, right? This would be something that could override that system on some of these vehicles because it's looking at it electronically to control the flow of the compressor, right? And we can see that we can use variable displacement compressors to control flow. We can use expansion valves as well as cycling the compressor off and on, right? Now, I told you we'd get in a little deeper into the variable displacement compressor, just to kind of show us how this system works in a little more detail. If you remember back to the swash plate compressor, with the swash plate at an angle, when you rotate the shaft, the pistons will go back and forth. Now, this one is not double-sided pistons, right? So they're just a single side. So fewer pistons, but does the same work. Now, this one is outfitted with a control valve, right? A solenoid that will control pressure getting into a cavity inside that compressor. And that cavity is behind the swash plate. This cavity is sealed so that when it has more or less pressure in it, that ends up pushing against the swash plate and changing its angle. This is using the low side pressure and regulating it through the control valve into this cavity. At this point, with the valve mostly shut, it's not allowing pressure back here, and that allows for a full stroke, a full angle of that swash plate, so that as it rotates, the pistons get a full stroke and then makes higher pressure that leaves the compressor. When we go to the other extreme, we would basically be opening this valve and allowing more pressure in behind that piston, therefore making this different compressors will do this differently. This particular one can basically make no stroke. Others will have a limit, a downward limit, and will make very little stroke. That's up to the individual manufacturer. And you can notice that when this happens, we're basically getting little to no flow or pressure out of that compressor. This is a normally open valve, so that if this was unplugged, this was severed, there was a problem with that signal, it would divert or default to no compressor at all, right? And this is where it gets techs in trouble, because the diagnostic process of getting to this point of figuring out that the compressor ain't pumping, right, is fairly straightforward. But you put a new compressor on and it still ain't pumping, then we have a problem, right? A really expensive problem, because it could be something as simple as this circuit it has a problem. Maybe the valve itself has malfunctioned. Maybe it's not getting sent a signal to turn on in the first place because the computer feels that there's something wrong and it doesn't want to, right? What are the things that are considered before a control module will turn that compressor on, whether it will send signals to make that compressor work, right? This particular example, which is the same one that uses that compressor that I showed you, right? There's a high frequency pulse width modulated signal that goes to that control valve, and it is always grounded. So that's how it can control the flow through that particular sensor or that solenoid. And it's controlled by the climatronic control module, in this case, the AC control module, if you will. One thing that it might look at would be solar operation, right? How much sun load it has, a photo sensor to actually measure that. It can look at the output by looking at the outlet temperature. In this case, so we're showing you the left center outlet and the right center outlet, so it can actually measure those independently, right? It can look at things like the duct temperature coming in. It can look at the temperature in the instrument panel itself, and use all of this to decide if it even wants to turn on that compressor, right? So then you might have a vehicle that the AC is not pumping, and you wrongly assume that is because of a faulty AC compressor, when there's a lot more variables that can go into it, right? Okay. Before we move on to refrigerant handling, did you guys have any other questions about this perchance?
So Rick, one
Yes.
of the things I heard you say twice that you can't flush these AC systems. I know when I was still working at the dealerships for Volkswagen, we actually had a lot of failures in compressors where they actually had a Robin air system that we had to reverse flush the systems to get all the debris out of them, where we took the expansion valves out, or the H block out, and we took the manifold off the back of the compressor, and we reverse flush using R134 refrigerant and a double filter system.
Right.
And it would take hours to flush these things out.
Right.
So you would finally get clean R134 coming through the system, liquid 134 coming through the system.
Right.
And I know most shops out in the real world don't have that system because, one, it's very expensive, and two,
Right.
it does require a lot of refrigerant in order to operate that system.
Right.
But
so
I mean,
maybe I could rephrase that, and maybe you should rephrase that when you teach this class, right? To say, and this is me talking. My personal experience is that if I can't be 100% sure that I get it clean with traditional flushing tools, I would prefer to replace it, right? What do I know I can get clean? A straight piece of aluminum pipe, a straight piece of hose. But if it's a hose with a muffler in it, I can't be sure that I'm getting all the crap out, right? If it's a high efficiency condenser and evaporator, I'm thoroughly convinced I can never get it completely clean, right? And from a cost benefit analysis, it's cheaper to buy that part that you've spent hours flushing than it is to flush it, right? So it's not that you can't, it's that it's really not cost effective or recommended to flush, right? Now, on a brand new car where you can hook up a machine and walk away and go do something else, and then the manufacturer didn't have to buy a part, then maybe that's cost effective, right? Is that kind of what you were doing, like warranty stuff, right?
Some of it was warranty, some of it was actually, even now they're still having failures with those compressors. And yeah, instead of replacing an evaporator, a condenser, the receiver dryer, and a compressor, they would put the compressor on and then put a receiver dryer in and flush the whole system out.
And that has time and time again bitten me in the butt trying to do that, because that's the way we always did it. And when we started transitioning to these more efficient components, I tried to continue to do that. and kept getting failures because little bits and pieces were left that ended up in the compressor. So literally AC jobs these days are, you get everything except a straight piece of aluminum pipe replaced.
Yeah, a lot of times I do a lot of AC work at home in the summer in St. Louis because it's very profitable.
Mm-hmm.
And if the compressor is guts are in the system,
Mm-hmm.
the same thing. If the hose has got a muffler, it's definitely getting replaced, but I try
Yep.
to replace all the lines anyway.
Yep.
Everything but the evaporator. And if it doesn't flush, it gets one of those too.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, it comes down to how much do you want to take the risk for warranty, right? Because a few little bits of debris that you didn't get out when you flushed it means you destroyed the new compressor you put on. And
Yeah,
that's not something, so it comes down to, when I try to save the customer money,
right.
it ends up costing me time, effort, and money, right?
When they're sweating in the car because I didn't sell them enough parts, they forget about the money I saved them.
Absolutely, right? I think what happens, and you know, I was not the shop owner, I was the dude in the back of the shop. What I think happens is, and I've seen this from my boss that owned the shop, was when he goes, okay, it's going to be $2,500 to do this, and they're like, I can't afford that. Can I do something cheaper? And he has to weigh no money versus some money and taking a chance. Well, that's his chance, not mine, right? I don't want to take the chance because that turns into, he and I would have a
Well,
conversation that if this comes back, you're going to pay me to fix it. But 2 months later, he forgot about that conversation and he wants me to do it for free.
oh, Dios mío.
Who's that?
Hey, Damien, can you mute your phone?
There we go. All right. I don't know. Do I have control? Can I mute people?
I think
Maybe. Yeah, somewhere in there I probably can. Yeah, so that's why I recommend it that way. That's why I recommend to you guys to recommend it that way. But you know, use your own personal experience to explain that. You know, that makes perfect sense to me, that you would say, look, we did these flushing operations and we were told to do them when I worked at the dealer, but there were times when that didn't work and it took out the new compressor we installed, right? And that's what we're trying to avoid. I mean, the parts stores would prefer that we didn't have to warranty stuff that really wasn't their fault because it was made poorly, right? I would prefer not to do it again for free or for a reduced amount of money. Can you tell I worked flat rate? Right?
yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, there's a bit of CYA in all of this too, right? You want to make sure you diagnose where the problem is and you don't sell them more than they need. But if it's got a blowed up compressor and it's got crap shrapnel everywhere in the system, let's replace the system. And let's not forget that there might be one in the rear and there's debris in that one too. And you may have to take it apart to get to the expansion valve. I know a lot of systems, it's a pain in the butt. Orifice tube up front, expansion valve for the rear. You can't just flush that, even though it's a straight line there and a straight line back. You got to go take the expansion valve out of the system to make that work, you know?
Yeah, a lot of conversion vans are that way.
Yep.
Hey, I apologize for having that mic open.
No problem.
I was just gonna make a comment. Last year I bought this bottle that's used to flush. So I wasted my money on that, right?
So is this for your own personal stuff? You know, there's always that, hey, can I do something cost me a little bit in labor and a little bit in parts, and maybe it saves me hundreds of dollars, and I'm willing to take that chance, right? But our customers are people that are doing this for a living and getting paid, and we want to encourage them to do it once the right time, the right way, and not have any comebacks or create any comebacks, right?
Well,
What
that's
you
a
do
good
on our
advice.
car is different. Heck yeah, man. I do all kinds of shady stuff on my own car, right?
That's a good advice. I'll stay with it then.
Yeah.
But actually I bought it for a customer. I was gonna do a flush, and that's the one that was calling me right now.
Oh, gosh.
I got a whole bunch of problems with the truck, and I told him I can't move from here right now.
Yeah. Well, so the other thing too is you guys get the, hey, my AC is not working. Can I get it in right away? Sure, bring it in. Right. And you hear them pull up and you hear the brakes grinding and the fins are showing on the rotors. Right. There's oil and coolant leaking all over the place. Right. But they don't have any money for that, but they got money for that AC. At least that's how it is in Tucson.
Two things always work, the radio and the AC.
Heck yeah. All right, so let's carry on. So refrigerant handling, just basically in this section, talking a little bit about the different refrigerants that you're likely to see. We've got R134 and R1234YF are the two big players. We're starting to see more in the Euro market with CO2 or R744. These systems R134 and 1234YF can be virtually identical as far as hardware is concerned, but that doesn't mean that you can make 1234YF a drop-in a replacement. It certainly doesn't mean that you can take 1234YF out and put 134 in. That's actually an EPA violation because these folks are, when they build these things, are getting EPA credits, carbon credits for using that refrigerant. And it's the same thing as cutting the exhaust off of a diesel, putting 134A in place of 1234YF. Okay. The change in refrigerants has not been because they stopped working. It has been because of their environmental impact, right? And our attempt to lessen that impact. That's why we made the switch in the 90s to 134. That's why we're making another transition now. There are refrigerants that are on an approved list. And the main reason that R130 or 1234YF has become de facto standard for most is because of the carbon credits that the government is giving you if you use them. So you could classify that as the winner at this point, but we want to make them aware that they're also going to run into stuff that might use this, and this works a lot differently, different temperatures because of the gas being different, but the heat transfer works the same way, right? We raise the boiling point so that we can condense it to a liquid in the condenser, and we drop the boiling point so that we can evaporate it in the evaporator, right? Works the same way, except we've got 225 PSI on the low side and 1600 PSI on the high side, okay? But it's CO2. It's pretty easy to get CO2, right? And it has a lot less environmental impact because we find it naturally occurring. It's not something we had to make up like we did with these other gases. We're going to have different fittings for each. Yes.
Rick, and speaking of the fittings there, have you run into people talking about being able to change the YF fittings to regular 134 fittings and then switching refrigerant?
It's probably possible, and I'm sure there are adapter fittings or replacement fittings for those, especially on the manufacturers that changed within the same model, right? So that the car didn't change when they made the change to 1234YF. But we have to enlighten all of our customers that that is an EPA violation to do that, right? I'm not saying it won't work. I can say with confidence that a switch from 1234 to 134 would end up with a system that was better when we switched from 134 retrofits to R12s, right? Because those don't operate at the same temperatures in the evaporator and the condenser, and so things weren't really engineered to work the same way. So possible, yes. Recommended, absolutely not. Okay. Illegal, yes. So
only if you
that should
get
answer,
caught, right?
like with everything. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm sure it's possible, but different different lubricants, different fittings for sure, right? Lubricants is a big one for me because I've gotten burned by this a time or two over the years using what I thought was the right refrigerant or using what came with my parts from the parts store, and it ended up being the wrong stuff and causing problems. For the most part, we're going to be looking at PAG oils. Hybrid vehicles are a different story. They're going to have a different setup. The recommendation that I can give all of you, and I would recommend that you give to all of your students, is look it up yourself and see what they take. And you're going to get different part numbers. You're going to have to cross-reference whatever it is. Just make sure that what you were given from the parts store is the right stuff, right? That you're using the right weight PAG oil and it's the right kind of oil. For example, this one here on this Super Duty uses 9 ounces of PAG 46. This one on an F-150 could have 134 or 1234, depending on what was installed or what the mid-year split was or whatever. And each of them take different oil. Okay. And so this becomes even more critical. You know, you don't want to have somebody look it up year, make, model, and they send you an oil, but they sent you PAG YN35 and you need PAG YN12 because it's our R134 system. Okay, because wrong oil, you're going to shorten the life of that compressor and cause everybody a lot of needed expense. Right. This is me personally. If this is not something you're comfortable with, hide this slide when you teach the class, but I recommend staying away from oils that say universal. It's just going to cause problems, right? That's something that I can say with confidence, you know, but this is supposed to work for 12 and R134, right? Crazy. But why wouldn't you want to just stock one thing if you were a shop, right?
Yes.
So the draw is there. I just don't think it's the kind of thing that's going to turn out well. Any experience with oils that you guys have?
I always just go back with whatever it recommends. I've never tried anything universal.
Yeah. I can say we are in the era of manufacturer specific fluids, and using what is recommended is the best approach. And I'm not talking just AC, right?
Yeah.
Coolant, power steering fluid, automatic transmission fluid, gear oil, right? They're all
honestly
different.
there's only a few different PAG oils viscosities anyway. It's not like you got to stock 30
Yes.
of them.
Right. Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. I mean, you've got, you know, probably we're down to about 3 viscosities that are in general use. You've got the ones for hybrid electric compressors, and then the ones that now for R1234YF. So.
Rick, I have a question, but it has to do with refrigerant.
Yeah.
The industry always uses pounds as the unit of measurement, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've always had that this curiosity about changing or converting it to ounces. Sometimes a manufacturer might say so much pounds,
right?
And I get like 2 or 3 cans of 12 ounces each, and it you know, in ounces it's the same. Is that the right thing to do, or is it wrong?
Oh no, so it's never going to be a certain number of cans. It's going to be conversions going on right and left. Red sticker oftentimes these days will have it in imperial and metric units of measure, right? But that can be whole numbers with decimal places. That can be ounces. That can be decimal kilograms. That can be grams, right? Again, there's no rule that says this is the only way to say this is how much of this thing you need. So yeah, but it's as easy as asking your phone these days what the
Well,
conversion.
fortunately for you, Damien, we're going to have a machine that if you just keep punching the button, it'll tell you pounds, it'll tell you ounces, it'll tell you whatever you want to know.
Yeah, absolutely.
No,
That's
just
one of the
thinking
benefits of those.
You won't use those cans no more.
Okay, well, just thinking of my garage, you know.
Oh yeah, sure. Now we've been having to do that forever. And what was fun was when we went from 14-ounce cans to 12-ounce cans, because that's how old I am, right? We had to kind of change our conversion inside our head.
Yeah, before I bought my
still-
AC machine, I just had a 30-pounder and a scale, and that
Yep.
was the most accurate way I could figure it out. But
Still works.
I
now
actually have an R12 can that's 16 ounces.
That's an
No
old
way.
school one. That's
Yeah, I
that's,
do.
that's earlier
I
than
still
me.
have some in the basement.
Yep.
That's 1 pound.
Yeah, even before they went to 14 ounces.
Yeah.
hey, I'm calling the people. He's bootlegging R12 out of his basement.
I'm trying to find somebody to buy the stuff that I hoarded in the 90s.
Old
I still
car
have like
clubs.
2 cases of R12 out there, and I can't find anybody that wants it. Everybody with old stuff is putting vintage air R134 systems on. So
Yeah.
You get out to enough of the old classic car shows, people will buy it.
Classic car. Yeah, yeah.
it's true. I've been thinking about putting it on Craigslist, but then I look at my 609 certificate and it says you're not allowed to sell it to somebody who's not certified.
Right.
Yeah. So I guess if I'm teaching it, I got to follow it, right?
Well, just you don't have to sell it. Just ask for a donation.
Ah, there we go. Donations accepted. All right, cool. I like the way you think. All right, so oil, we normally will put oil in a system when it is apart. My recommendation is AC system blows up, you got to replace almost everything in the system. There's no oil now in the system. There's no oil in the stuff that you bought from the parts store, or you've gotten rid of it all. Let's start from scratch. The example I gave you on the F-250 takes 9 ounces of PAG 46. Okay, so I'm going to get 9 ounces and I'm going to put 3 ounces in the condenser, and I'm going to put 4 ounces in the compressor, and I'm going to spread it around in the different components and then assemble the vehicle. That has worked really well for me. If you need to put some in after the fact, there are tools like this one that allow you to fill some oil up and then kind of force it in. In this case, you screw that together and it collapses and pushes the oil into the system. Also, refrigerant machines can draw oil in as well during service. So several ways to get lubricants into the system.
Yeah, that's probably the $1 million question we get from students is, how much oil, if I just changed the compressor, because maybe the clutch was bad. It didn't blow up. There wasn't no guts in it. The system's clean. And I only drained like 1 ounce out of the compressor. Do I just put the compressor back in with 1 ounce, or should I put more in?
So each manufacturer is going to be slightly different, but along the lines of drain it. What did you get? Put this plus a little is usually what I've seen, right? But that plus a little, it varies from manufacturer to manufacturer, right? So just a little bit of time sitting in front of the electronic service information should probably answer that question for you, right? Sure. Seat of the pants, add another ounce maybe. We don't want too much. If this thing ever showed any signs of leak, then all that's out the door, because that's one of the things that's going to leak out first is the oil, right? And the fact that there was only 1 ounce in the compressor, that really has no bearing on how much you should put back in. At that point, it comes down to let's flush it all out. That'd be about the only time I would think flushing would be a good idea, was if you're just trying to get all the oil out so we can start from scratch. Okay. Now gauges, a lot of cool things that we can do with gauges. Mostly we're using it to monitor pressure on the high side and the low side. And we want to be able to use that to get some insight into that system and how it's functioning, right? We can look at it without the system running as a static pressure. We can look at it with the engine operating to be able to see that difference in pressure, to get some idea of what's going on inside. We can also use leak detectors to be able to find and fix those leaks. Electronic leak detectors are the tool of choice for this, right? We want to be able to put a vehicle back together and check it for leaks, right? This is really the only tool suitable for that. If you are checking for leaks on a system that you put back together, that you've just brought in, and you see that it's low on refrigerant charge, understand that refrigerant is heavier than air, and the places we want to sniff for that refrigerant leak are going to be underneath fittings and hoses and lines where we're looking for that that leak. We want to go and ask ourselves, where would that refrigerant flow to? Let's put the detector there.
Hey,
We're showing
Rick,
you, yeah.
do you recommend one refrigerant detector over another? Because it seems to be like a question I get.
I know everybody wants to
one?
ask questions about tools, right? Which scan tool should I buy? Which tool should, you know? We try to avoid those questions if possible, because we're not selling tools, right? And at least in my classes, I try to set myself apart from those classes I attended that we ended up calling sales seminars, right? Hey, come to this class. We got this cool new, diagnostic thing we're going to talk about, this subject, and it turns into, let me show you how to use this tool to diagnose that, and leave you with the impression that the only way to do it is with this tool, right? You can mention things like they have to meet certain certification levels, right? And pretty much if you get a tool that meets the certification level for, say, R1234YF, and its ability to see like a 15 or 1.5 ounce a year leak level, yeah, go with that. But a brand name, how many of them are made by the same people with a different name stenciled on the front? When it comes to these tools, I suspect that that's the case. They have a different color, blow molded case, and a different name etched in the front, and they're probably all exactly made in the same manufacturing facility. So that's my thoughts. Good quality, yes. Don't get it off AliExpress for $15. How's that?
Good.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Other leak detection methods. We can use dye. Okay. This has its place. Most manufacturers are putting dye in from the factory. So this is a good opportunity for us to get out the special glasses and to get the ultraviolet lamp out and look for leaks when we discover that this system is low on charge. Before we just fill it back up, let's make sure that have covered all bases on any potential leak places, right? And dye can certainly help us out with that. What it can't help us out with is looking to see if when we put it back together, we don't still have any leaks, right? Because the dye takes time to show. It's not really going to help us out with that. We also need to make sure that we've washed any of this dye residue away before we let the vehicle leave after we fixed it, so that we don't think we have a leak in the same spot again if it comes back for some reason. Okay. And then, sometimes we can actually see them just with the naked eye, right? It seems to be a regional thing, because the way leaks can show up is oil leaks out with the leak and collects dirt, and that can show up as dark spots, right? But if you live in an area where it rains all the time, like Seattle, that ain't gonna work. But if you live where I live and it rains, a handful of times a year, then it can. And it does. It's very effective to look for these areas where we can see just naked eye signs of a leak, okay, without dye or ultraviolet light. Obvious things. There's a hole with a rip in it. I mean, a hose with a rip in it. That is the kind of thing that we can use those natural leak detectors for. Okay. Moving on to some more of the equipment we can use are refrigerant identifiers. These are really critical to ensure that your equipment stays safe. These are critical to help you diagnose if there's the wrong kind of gases in the system. And I'm not just talking about weird aftermarket refrigerant replacements, but air that's also in the system can show up with these. And that can certainly cause problems if there's air infiltration inside the system. Now, it goes without saying that refrigerant handling and 609 certification go hand in hand. This is not a replacement for a 609 training class. There are different organizations like MAX and ASE and stuff like that that can actually do tests and proctor or do classes and proctor tests for you to get certified. What we really want to at least cover here briefly is the fact that if you as a technician are working and being compensated in any way for fixing AC, mobile AC, you need to be 609 certified, right? For the shop, they need to make sure that they have certain housekeeping things put in place where all of their equipment has been documented as being certified, serial numbers, things like that. Just forms you basically have to fill out, and also forms need to go to the parts store, and they're technically not supposed to sell you 30 pounders of refrigerant unless you prove that you have certified technicians doing the work, right? So it's kind of this self-policing action that we all take as professional technicians to make sure that you've gone through these classes or at least passed the test. And you know, the big part of 609 is not that after you get that certificate, you are an expert in fixing AC. It's that you have been instructed on the safe handling practices that will keep refrigerant out of the environment and keep you safe when you're working on it, right? That's really the things that 609 covers. It's not about your competency, right? It's about the fact that, hey, you're supposed to know better. You're not supposed to be venting that stuff out into the atmosphere, right? Okay. Feelings on 609 certification from you guys?
Pretty much hit the nail on the head.
Yeah. Do you guys do any 609 training at all?
We do not.
Yeah. So I do some classes for Max teaching and proctoring for them. That's really all it boils down to.
Okay. Yeah, we as a whole, we're just getting into the HVAC training from an offering within the Guru program. It is not that we've been doing. Now, most people on the call have got various levels of experience with air conditioning, service, repair, and or training, but our program is just rolling into this for one particular customer.
Yeah, right on. Well, good. Let's get them fixed up. All right. Yeah. So next section is talking about service work that you might do in the airflow system, right? And the number one thing is going to be cabin air filter replacements, right? You know, obviously there are service recommendations for that. There are implications if this thing gets clogged to this level or worse. And we just spend a couple slides talking about the process. If this is something new or you have like some beginner students that end up in your class, right, is how does this process work of replacing a cabin air filter, right? And that basically starts with, let's look up the particular vehicle with our electronic service information. In this case, we're using a 2015 F-150 as an example, right, to get the process to know where it is, because they can be in different places, and it's not just let me crawl underneath the passenger side and pull it out. It's not always there. It might be in a slightly different location. In this particular example, you open the glove box, you know, pull a trim panel down, and open up the system to slide out the cabin air filter. And there might be multiple filters that are stacked inside there, where you slide one in and then scooch it over and then put a second one in behind it, right? Everybody does it a little bit differently, and that's where you can spend time hunting around, or you can spend, you know, 2 minutes looking up where to find it, what tools you might need to get to it, right? You also might run into vehicles, not as common anymore, but vehicles that were optional for cabin air filters, right? This particular example shows one that was optional, and this one was never installed. It could be retrofit after the fact. You would basically cut open that section of the heater case. They would give you a a cabin filter and a cover that would screw in. You can see here where we've got one of the holes to hold the cover that holds cabin air filter and covers the bottom of the hole after you've cut that section out. Okay.
Is that the old Ford Taurus there?
No, that's a General Motors, like a Suburban or a CK, something like that, pickup, I believe, if memory serves. Of course, you can also have service work that includes cleaning out debris from critters that may have gone in there and caused some problems, or it's been sitting in an area where it's been letting a bunch of stuff in through the outside air vents, right? That's also something that you'll have to deal with. Got to get creative sometimes, shop vac and adapters to get little hoses to fish stuff in out of there after you drop the blower motor is usually what it takes to take care of a path like that. Now, blower motors will fail in other ways besides this, right? They can fail in ways that are electrical, of course, right? And so how are these things controlled? We have to wrap our head around how that one sitting in our bay is being controlled, how the different blower speeds are commanded, and how they're realized, right? Example like this, we've got a blower switch, we've got a blower relay, we've got a set of resistors. Okay, kind of a system that we're more familiar with. We've got this is all taking place on the power side, right? Where we're running power to the motor through different resistors depending on the position of the blower switch. We can sometimes have systems where all of those resistors are on the ground side. Okay, different way of doing it and a different way of approaching your testing if that's the case. Some systems do it a lot differently. We've got systems where there's a lot more electronic control, right? Where the blower motor is a module, right? And we basically send signals to the module that internally change the blower speed. Okay, we can have trouble finding some of these components sometimes, and we may have to look on wiring diagrams, look in component locators to actually locate where those things are at for testing. Okay, where do we test? Okay, and the reason I bring this up is it was very common for folks to just dive in and assume everything had a blower resistor and everything was easily accessible, and they would just dive underneath the passenger floor and start poking around with their test equipment. It's so much different these days that we've got to get these wiring diagrams out so that we can understand. For example, this one, it's not a simple change in a resistor changing the amount of voltage getting to the blower motor, but different signals to the control module, then changing the pulse width that goes to the blower motor, and we're controlling both on the power and the ground side. Okay, and so again, we're just exposing them to the fact that there are different ways to do this, right? And we'll dig into those in more depth in the diagnostic class, right? But this is really where it comes down to making them understand that it's not a one size fits all, right? And if you get students in the class that keep kind of asking these questions like, hey, well, what kind of system is used on this particular year of car, right? This make and model. We need to try to steer them back around to, we don't want to expend effort these days trying to remember. We want to spend a few minutes going and looking and knowing where to go find the information quickly about the car that just rolled into my bay is the key. Because even though it's a Ford and you've worked on Fords for a long time, they may have a different way of doing it on that model. And if you just go in and start testing willy-nilly based on what you think is happening, it can waste a lot of your time and send you in circles. Okay. And what type of tools will testing involve? Well, it can be anything from a simple test light to a DVOM to amp clamps hooked up to a DVOM or hooked up to a lab scope. A lot of these can be more effectively diagnosed with lab scopes these days, right? In this case, you can see that we've got a power supply that we're measuring for voltage. You can see that we're using an inductive amp clamp to measure amperage flow to the motor. And you can see that we've got a voltage signal that we're monitoring, that is the pulse width modulated signal to the blower motor module, that then goes in and controls and changes the amperage flow to the motor, right? And so each of these is going to have a different approach and a different set of tools that you need. And again, you'll probably start getting questions about, well, which lab scope should I buy, right? You're going to be getting those kind of questions too.
Oh yeah.
Yep. Well, so my understanding is a lot of your customer base for this customer is like a lot of Robinair and Snap-on, right? So we use those examples as much as possible, right, in this class. So they should have a lot of that covered with what they're doing in there, what they have available to them already, right?
Yep.
All right, and then servicing, again, we're going to use gauges, but how do we effectively use those? What's the process like, right? And you can kind of see how the flow of this class goes, where we introduce something, talk about it in general, and then get more specific later on, and kind of build that knowledge base out from there, right? And so with gauges, we have to understand that there are different fittings for each of the different types of refrigerant that you're going to use. Okay, here's an example of R134 fittings. You can see that they're similar to 1234. That was the high side. This is your 1234, right? So you can kind of toggle back and forth on these and see there's high side 134, low side 134, and here's our 1234 low and high side, right?
Hey,
they're quick disconnects, but they're different. Yes.
Rick, is there, and I don't mean to get ahead if you're getting there, is there anything in here about changing these fittings? On the GMs, it's real common when you pull the high side connector off, they start leaking, even though they didn't leak before you started working on it.
Not specifically going into the actual physical replacement of the valves. Yeah, for that, the most part is you make sure you get the right one, and you got to have that weird socket.
Right.
Don't use pliers, although you'd be tempted to.
Yeah, I just got to wear on those. I've got the kit, and I just change them before I even fill the damn thing back up.
That became standard operating procedure at our shop too. Most specifically, when you could replace just the Schrader, everything got new Schraders before you filled it back up.
The Honda minivans, the fittings are right up by the firewall, and the guys will jack their connector around on there, and they bend that little tip on the Schrader.
Mm-hmm.
My neighbor had one, and Honda told her it was going to be $2,500 because they had to put new lines on it. And funny thing was, Napa had 2 Schraders for about $3 that fixed the problem.
There you go. Who's the hero now, right?
That was me, because I made about $4,000 on that job.
Yeah,
hey, right on.
Sounds like you got about $2,450 to blow.
No, I told them, I said, hell, if $1,000 will fix it, that's half of what they wanted.
There you go.
That was someone from church, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Way to go.
Yeah. Next series of slides just kind of introduces them to how these gauges work, what you're actually doing when you're fiddling with the knobs on these. This, although it does not say Robinair, I bought these specifically for putting this class together. They are Robinair, but they are the entry-level Robinair, and I'm unhappy to say that the high side gauge itself started leaking the second time I tried to use it, and come to find out these are exactly the same as the cheapest Amazon gauges you can buy that are unbranded, but these were in a Robinair box. So don't recommend these if that question comes up of what to buy. If they look like this, run. So what's happening when we open the valves, right? This one shows when we open up the low side valve, and that can be on the front, that can be on the side. Really doesn't matter which, right? When you open it up, you're basically connecting the center port to the port underneath the valve, right? The low side. You're connecting the low side, which would hook underneath this gauge, to your yellow hose, which is I call that the money hose, because when you're putting Freon back in there, you're almost in the money. You're on your way to being done with this job. So you would open that up for evacuating refrigerant out, for putting refrigerant back in. Less often used is opening up this valve, and we'll often do that to connect to the high side, not for charging, but it's often used when we go to evacuate, and then I open both valves. These valves can leak if they're not fully seated, open and closed. So just cracking them is oftentimes used, but don't be surprised if you might get a little bit of a refrigerant leak once these start to age. Opening them all the way will usually take care of that by back seating the valve. Okay. We also have on this particular model, and on many, a sight glass, and that sight glass is there supposedly to ensure that you do not introduce any liquid refrigerant into the system, and to see flow as that happens, right? I've never found much use for these other than a potential place for another leak to happen on my gauges. So, you know, you guys use a sight glass on your gauges to any effect over the years?
Just to verify the charge is going in.
Yeah, just to see that it's moving, right? And then the gauges themselves, there's a lot more on the gauges than you might think, right? And a lot of students don't really put two and two and get together to see that, right? So one, we've got a gauge that goes, reads on the low side pressure and vacuum. And so we can see that that pressure can be read as bar, that pressure can be read as PSI on this particular gauge set. The inches goes into inches of mercury. You can see that INHG. Vacuum right in there, right? And we can measure that vacuum as well as measure pressure. And so, you know, you use whatever unit of measure you're comfortable with, right? If you're a longtime German car fan and bar is, you know, second nature to you, and you use that, perfectly acceptable to use that as a unit of measure. You'll note that bar is about 1 atmosphere, 14.7 psi at sea level, just a different unit of measure. You'll also see some other things that are on this gauge. Temperature readings, right? This particular one has temperature in Celsius as well as Fahrenheit. And that comes into play with our pressure temperature charts. And we'll talk about that when we get into static pressure testing, how that can be used. There's also a little screw slot there, and that's your zero adjustment. You can see that this particular gauge actually needs to be zeroed. It's reading about 5 PSI with nothing hooked up to it, with the lines wide open. So zeroing that is much more important when you're trying to determine how much vacuum you're pulling during an evacuation, during that recovery process. Being off by 4 or 5 PSI is not going to be a killer when it comes to what the actual pressure reads. That's not enough to really raise my awareness. But certainly for the vacuum side, you want that to be accurate. You can usually take and unscrew the front bezel off of there, and a pocket screwdriver will get you hooked up with that. Just make sure there's no pressure in the lines, right? Even go so far as to take the line off so that it's wide open at that point and open up the valve, okay? Because it would suck to zero it when it really wasn't making any difference, okay? Or you had pressure in there. Recovery. Some shops may have recovery only setups, and that would basically be the type of tool where we would take refrigerant out of a system and put it in a container that would then go somewhere else to get recycled, or that tank of refrigerant would be run through your regular AC machine that we're going to talk about here in a minute to be recycled, okay? These are less common in the shops, and you may not even have any in the shops you visit, but make them aware that this is good if they find that they've got a contaminated system that's full of refrigerant that you absolutely do not want in your expensive AC equipment. A tool like this can get it out and put it in a tank that then go to hazardous waste, if you will, okay? Evacuation is handled with a vacuum pump, right? And that process is basically going in and reducing the pressure inside the system so that we can lower the boiling point, right? Couple examples here we can show the students. One is just a picture on the left, and that is water boiling on my stove at home at less than boiling temperature. And the reason is I live at 2,250 feet of elevation. So that in and of itself lowers the boiling point of water. And then we can play the video, and that shows water boiling in the jar, similar to what we showed you earlier, just a shorter clip. And it's all the way full of water. And as soon as we turn the vacuum pump on, it starts boiling. Okay. And so that is exactly what we are doing inside of an AC system. And we have to understand that this process takes time. And we're not just removing air out of the system with the evacuation, but we are boiling that water that's in the system. Now, recommendation is to elevate the temperature of the components so that we can not have to get as low of a vacuum in order to boil the water. This shortens the process and makes it more thorough, and we're able to get more moisture out. Oftentimes this is nothing more than let's warm the vehicle up with the hood closed, with the AC off, of course, because there's no refrigerant in it at this point. And then we'll go in and start the evacuation process and lower the hood down a little bit, not pinching the hoses. And we can retain that engine heat to heat up all of the components in the system. The receiver dryer or accumulator is the most likely to hold on to moisture. And so we want to make sure we warm that up to the best of our ability. Okay.
Rick, I got two questions.
Yes.
Two. The vacuum pump that I've always seen, one stage, two stage. Does that matter?
The better your vacuum pump works, the quicker this process will go. So a two-stage will pull a deeper vacuum faster.
Faster.
Right.